You guys have Dick Idol galleries on. You've got a website on that side too.
Yep. And then obviously he's got his own website too, the dickidol.com. So
yeah. So
bummer that I assume dickpics.com is already taken.
we tried for that one, but
it's probably a hefty.
Yeah, you couldn't get it, huh? They wouldn't sell it to you. HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Deer Grow.
Man, we've been using Deer Grow products for a long time. The Plot Start and Plot Boost, more recently Plot Till. Now we've got 3 new liquid fertilizers that have been put in the mix that will cover everything we could want for a food plot program.
It's huge, man. The more food plotting we do, it's like, man, the liquids just make sense. Like whether it's herbicides or the Plot Start and Plot Boost, and now the fertilizers getting mixed in. It's like, man, I can combine all of those in certain cases and do less passes for more results.
I mean, it's all about efficiency. I mean, like you said, less passes. If you're out there treating your beans with glyphosate in the summertime, you can mix in this fertilizer, do that all at once. You have the boost in there to help some metabolism. It's all about efficiency when we're talking about food plots. And really the big difference on these liquid fertilizers is you're bypassing some of these soil limitations, pH limitations, the soil type. In a lot of cases, we talk about dry fertilizers only being available for 17% of what you put down in the first year. These liquid fertilizers straight into the plant are 90% available in the first year. Huge difference in what you're going to see in growth.
It's huge. And so right now you can use code HUNTR15 for 15% off any of the Deer Grow products on their website. And as always,
better food plots, bigger deer. And we're back.
Ew.
HUNTR Podcast, episode 200.
Big 200.
200.
Yeah, we did it.
We did it. Yeah, we did it.
And we're done.
And
all right, everybody.
And we'll see you next week.
We go home now. Yeah, here we are, man. 200. Pretty
Hard
cool
to believe, huh?
Yeah. Hey, I'll do my part here. Wherever you guys are listening to us from, YouTube, Apple Podcast, Spotify, we appreciate you guys being here. Give us a like, follow, or subscribe, whatever's appropriate for the channel. One of those will give you a notification whenever we drop these episodes, but typically they're Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Sometimes, getting into the season here, they may be Thursdays as well, so you can check those out. If you've written us on Instagram DM or the website, we have seen those. I flagged them. Jeremy and I are proactively working on getting back through those, but I know we're a little bit backlogged, so thanks for your patience. Thank you guys for reaching out. That is just really cool for us. Last item, we've got some new merch. Yep. Jeremy and I have been working on just some designs and stuff with some friends of ours that will actually be in the podcast later today, TJ Eads and some friends. And so we're proud of those, super happy with, how those have been received. A lot of you have bought that stuff already. So that helps us that, I need a new mic stand. I break one at least once a week. So
I just bought them on Amazon and we're in the red.
Thank you. And we're in the red. So thank you guys for supporting the podcast. And here we go.
200.
Yeah.
Hard to believe, man.
And for number 200, we've got an in-studio guest, Cody Idol, sitting here next to my left here. Son of the infamous Dick Idol.
Yeah.
The notorious, I should say.
The notorious.
Yeah.
Probably get in trouble for saying that. No, good to be here.
We timed it just right. We're like, okay, we got to, I think you kind of saw even pre-podcast here, pretty fly by the seat of our pants, right? So like coming up to it, I think we've multiple times we're like, well, who's going to be number 200? Who's going to be? And then like next thing you know, it's like, oh, Cody's coming in. Hey, that's number 200.
Yeah.
Yeah. I realized that on the drive home. I picked him up from the airport. We're driving home. I'm like, yeah, so this and that. Here's our process. Here's kind of, and I'm like, dude, I think you're number 200. Yeah, I realized we dropped 199 yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty wild. I mean, so what we said it was January of 21 we started this?
Yeah.
That was when episode 1 dropped?
Was it January?
I think January of 21.
Okay. So yeah, we're
in the 4th year of it.
Almost like over 4.5 years.
21, 22, 23, 24 is year number 4.
Dang. So we're over 4.5 years now.
Over 3.5 years.
Over 3.5.
Yeah.
Okay. 21, 22, 23.
All of 24 will be 4 years. Yeah.
We're in our 4th year. I see.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yep. So January of 25 will be 4 years complete.
Awesome. Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty wild. When I started with you guys in June of 22, it was like episode 70.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Wow.
We didn't even have a TikTok then.
No. Wow. Things have really changed.
You say things are getting pretty serious.
You might say that things escalated pretty quickly.
It got out of hand fast.
Nick killed a guy.
Yeah, I saw that.
First of all, Cody, appreciate you coming in this morning and literally coming in. Like most people are like, they're local guys. You came from Florida.
Yeah.
So coming up here, probably a little change of scenery, a little cooler weather in the morning.
Yeah, nice break from the heat for sure.
Yeah, I bet. Summers in Florida are not easy.
Well, and I'm a Montana boy, so this is I'm not used to it yet.
Yeah,
it's too hot.
How long have you been in Florida?
Since last April.
Okay.
So just over a year, and it's weird too that it's reversed, because like in Montana, like most places that get snow, January through March, it's cold months.
Yeah.
That's like the nice season down there.
Yeah.
But right now it's just nasty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I know I asked you a couple times. I should have it straight by now. But you were raised in Montana?
Yeah. So I'm 37. I lived in Montana till I was 32. And then, I moved to Nashville when I was 32. I was there for 3 years, and then just went down to Florida. So, been a Montana boy my whole life, and so I miss the mountains, but I get back and forth as much as I can to hunt and go see family. So,
What brought you east?
I met a girl.
That's how it always starts,
met
Nick.
a girl.
That's how it always starts. You gotta watch that
And
stuff.
here I am.
Yep. Yep. Well, I mean, it makes sense, a big change, right? I mean, going from Montana to Nashville, and then obviously now in Florida. I mean, yeah, I'm sure a massive culture change as well.
Yeah. And but it's nice, the nature of my work and what I do. I'm mobile, so I might have a home office there, but I don't have a job that I go to in Florida. So I'm able to travel a lot and spend. I've spent probably 2.5 months in Montana this year.
That's awesome.
So, gonna try to get back out. If not in September here for the elk rut, I'm going to try to get out late October, do some rifle, just general stuff. So,
and that's where is your dad still out in Montana?
Yep.
Is he originally from there though?
No. So my whole family is originally from North Carolina. He grew up in like Kernersville, High Point, tobacco farm country.
Yeah, tobacco farm country.
My mom's from Raleigh. So, my dad played for NC State back in the day, football.
Really?
That's another monument he did. He did the Wolfpack monument there
No
in front
shit.
of Carter Finley. So
that's awesome, man.
And that was a fun one. I was a kid, but when we unveiled that one, Phillip Rivers was still the quarterback.
Wow.
And so we were in the locker room with those guys.
That's really cool,
T.A.
dude.
McClendon and all those guys. So
man, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to kind of, like we were talking pre-podcast, like the Cabela's thing is the one that, I kind of tied it to right away. But yeah, I mean, obviously NC State, I mean, I assume that monument's still standing right in front of the stadium as people were going in and stuff?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yep. And then they did a series of like life-size bronze wolves. I think there's 6 or 7 of them, and they do like each one's in a different pose, and they have different names like Pride and Strength and everything else. But they've got one bearing its teeth that's right in the tunnel that all the football players rub when they come out of the field.
Out.
So that was pretty cool. And then as we talked about, he just did the one in Fayetteville there in front of Arkansas's football stadium, the Razorbacks. So
oh wow,
and that was a fun one too. He had Jerry Jones commissioned him to do that one, and they were commemorating. I hope I have the year right, 1964 when they won the national championship, and like Jimmy Johnson and Jerry Jones played for that team. So
damn,
that was the most recent one that was installed about, I want to say like 5 years ago.
Well, Cody, let's do this because I obviously we're gonna tie a bunch of different things together. But one of the reasons that we were gonna kind of come on here and talk is about your dad, Dick.
Yeah.
And so he grew up in North Carolina. Just as best as you can, give our listeners some background on your family and your dad and kind of like his start. And obviously they're hearing this and he's creating all of these monuments and stuff. Where's that coming from?
Sure. Well, I'll start at the end for one piece, and the funny thing is, art was a self-taught thing for him when he was like in his late 30s. So I mean, it wasn't. He grew up in High Point, North Carolina, tobacco farm. Like I said, went to NC State, and he was a wildlife biology major. Something that's really interesting too about how he even got there. He was so into the outdoors. He actually got draft letters from the Dallas Cowboys and stuff, and his family wanted him to go play in the NFL, but he wanted to do the outdoor thing so bad that when he graduated, he actually just packed up his stuff, and in his Ford Bronco back then, he graduated in 1969 and went straight from North Carolina all the way to Anchorage, Alaska, and ended up starting out working at a taxidermy shop, but then he started his own shop, and that kind of starts the journey. Then he started outfitting, and once he started having some like bigger clients and stuff, he was running the animals that were coming from there through his own shop. But kind of interestingly, and he did have a publication back then called Taxidermy International. If the old school OG collectors would know which one I'm talking about, but you'd hardly ever see him now. But yeah, he came back from Alaska back in the 70s, and this was right at the dawn of the whitetail days.
Okay.
This is when he had done all kind Africa, Alaska, all this stuff, but like for some reason when he came back, he took a fascination with these big deer and where they were coming from. And this is like about 6 or 8 years before the birth of North American Whitetail Magazine when they founded that. But
and do you think any of that was linked into like his North Carolina roots? Like, did he hunt deer growing up and stuff? I know a lot of people talk about that time frame, and it was like, guys here in Pennsylvania are like, man, if we saw a deer track in like the 50s and 60s, it was a big deal. Everybody came and saw it. But do you think any of that was linked to his North Carolina heritage there?
Interestingly, he always told me, he's like, I didn't get to seriously hunt until I left North Carolina. Like he ran a trap line and he hunted out there, but there was nothing of note as far as whitetails especially go back then. And I think that's why he had such a hunger to get out and travel.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, and the part I skipped right there with the NC State thing, he actually wanted to go to Alaska after high school, and NC State actually sent a recruiter with him on a hunting trip and went and camped with him for like 4 days and like talked him into coming.
What position did he play?
He was a running back in high school. And another little fun fact, when he left, he was the all-time single season rushing leader for North Carolina high school football. It's been broken since. This was back in the 60s. But,
yeah.
But he went as a running back, but he ended up playing corner.
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
Yeah. So, but yeah, like jumping to there's so much. I don't exactly know where to jump into because the whitetail stuff is its own.
I think for our listeners and for Jeremy and I, give us a premise of what your dad is known for. Because I think we've all heard the name Dick Idol, and then we do a little bit. You're like, oh, yeah, he did all the big sculptures at Cabela's or Bass Pro, and then you start to hear about some of these others. And then you tie in the North American Whitetail piece. I mean,
Sure.
if you were to give, like, here's the flagship staples, like the biggest accomplishments that your dad might be known for.
Sure. So, I mean, he co-wrote the Legendary Whitetails books. And, he was the co-founder of North American Whitetail Magazine with David Morris. But even prior to that, he had collected most of those heads. Like he owned the Hole in the Horn, and he owned the Fleming sheds.
Oh, wow. So he actually was the collector and owner of those things.
That Legendary Whitetails collection was his.
Oh, wow.
And so, but
I have Christmas ornaments of those on my tree every year. Yeah.
And kind of what brought the magazine to life was like when they first started, that's what he was doing as a passion. Like he was chasing down these big deer and doing all the research. And so when they first started writing articles, he just told me this the other day, David Morris that has Tecumate, he's basically told my dad, he's like, look, would you entertain the idea? It was their first magazine. He's like, would you entertain the idea of writing a couple articles? And he said, well, I'm not a writer, and he said, just humor me, do a couple, but that took off. And sure enough, if you read one of his books, like the intro, I think Gordon Whittington writes it, but they talk about, he ended up writing 200 articles in North American Whitetail in those early years. And so, but what they were doing, he lived in Seeley Lake, Montana. They'd find out about this big buck and he'd jump in his truck or hop on a plane and go wherever it was. And that's why he got the inside track on so many of these deer. And I mean, a lot of people know the Hole in the Horn story, but that's one of the best ones. But to note, once that Legendary Whitetails collection was like made public, he was traveling with like the NRA and, I have all these old ads that are like, come see Legendary Whitetail Hunter Dick Idol in Houston this week. And
is he just bringing them in a trailer basically?
Back then, yeah. Just transporting them. And, but they had, what's crazy is the original collection, it's much larger now, but the original collection had, like, every deer is one of the iconic ones that we look at now.
Right.
Like the Gould buck and the Jordan buck.
Yeah.
And, all these, the Illinois roadkill, and it just...
Did he tell you any of this? I would be curious to some of the stories of, like, how he came into possession of some of them. Like a Hole in the Horn buck. Like, is your dad basically going to that owner and being like, hey, like, interested in buying your deer? What?
Yeah, and back then, we were talking about this yesterday, there wasn't a competitive side to this. like nobody even knew. So
Cody told me a story yesterday of like, I can't remember if it was Alberta or whatever, but they used to go up and like the farmers would just, pick up the whitetail sheds and chuck them off to the side like rocks. They're like, yeah, we just want to make sure it doesn't pop our tires. And they would go up and just walk the field edges and pick up like 80, 90, 100-inch sheds that the farmers are just chucking off. Like has no use for them,
And they were even curious like why we wanted them.
Yeah, what do you want?
Like,
yeah.
They almost didn't even want to let us buy them. If we wanted them, we'd just go get them.
Yeah.
And that did happen quite a bit.
Wow.
But I was telling him there was one my dad got years ago that was up there that was like a 240, and it was just tacked to the side of this guy's barn. And he said, I'd love to buy that from you. And the guy was dumbfounded. Like, what are you going to do with them?
Yeah, what are you going to do with them?
And he's like, keep them. I want to take them back to my... but kind of, I guess the thing that brings it all together with this collecting is that hole in the horn story. And really, that's the one. So obviously we know the hole in the horn's number 2 ever, and I think he's number 1. But the cool nature of this is Fred Goodwin.
Nick, can you pull him up while he's talking about it? The hole in the horn buck. Just Google that.
Fred Goodwin was the original like OG antler collector.
Okay.
Before my dad.
Okay.
And he killed a giant buck that's actually in Legendary Whitetails back in like the 40s, called the Silver Ridge buck. But Fred had this big collection that he had assembled starting from like the 30s and the 40s. Yep, there he is. They got him at 328 and change.
And where's that buck from?
Ohio.
Yeah.
No way.
Yep.
Supposedly hit by a train. That's the leading.
Do we know which part of the state?
I'm gonna forget that.
It's a monster. Yeah, there's Klaus.
This deer was hit by a train?
They saying, yeah.
Wow.
And that was way back, right?
Yeah, I think the deer. So kind of going along with this story. So Fred Goodwin was the premier antler collector, and I think he was from Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Back in the day.
Would make sense.
But he was at a construction site, and one of his coworkers said, "Hey, I know you like all these big sheds. I got one back home in my hometown in this little tavern, this little hunting club that would crush any of these." And of course, you hear that all the time.
Sure.
But back then, Fred offered him $10 and said, "I'll give you $10 if you can get me a picture of this deer." And sure enough, the picture comes in, and he realizes that it's a giant, and he ends up waiting like a couple years to actually make it over there on like a work trip. He pops into this little place, sees it, and at the time, I think this was like the early 70s, the guy that owned the tavern wanted $1,000 for it.
Which back then,
Yeah.
that's substantial.
Yeah. And Fred said no. He'd never paid more than $500 for even these like now legendary deer. And so he went on without.
Which at the time, I mean, that's a lot of money.
It is
A lot.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I guess it was
A lot of money. What's $500 in the 70s relate to today?
I mean, probably $15,000 at least.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he passes on it, and then flash forward, I don't know the exact number of years, about 8-9 years, my dad gets word of this deer. And so he travels down there, or over there. I'd say he drove out from Montana and meets the guy in the tavern. He sits down, has the deer on the table in front of him, and he's been sitting in this little tavern for 30 years, 40 years.
Wow.
Past the drying period for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But so he scores him, and it takes him like a couple hours because it's just a mess.
Just crazy non-tip.
Yeah. And he ends up getting, and mind you, the Missouri buck had just come out. As
The Missouri Monarch.
Yeah, as the new world record at 333. So he and another deer that a hunter didn't take. So
Right.
we've got, but interestingly, up until this point, there hadn't been any deer over 300. So these two in the same time frame. Of course, this deer was 50, 60 years old, but no one really knew about him. But so the score is important, though. So 333 on the Missouri buck. My dad scores him there and comes up with 346 and 6/8.
Jeez.
And the tavern owner comes back and says, "So what'd you get?" And my dad just didn't want to share.
Yeah.
He's like, if I tell this guy what this is and he has any knowledge, he's not going to want to
Yeah,
sell it.
it's a world record, and he's just, the
Yeah.
price just quadrupled.
Yeah, so he's like, I've kind of messed myself up. There's There's
so much.
Yeah. And so
You bluffed him on the numbers.
yeah. I mean, at least he didn't
salesman.
say he didn't
Yeah.
say a fake number. He just he said he
didn't say any
Yeah,
number. Yeah.
I could be off. I'm
Yeah.
not quite sure on my math.
Yeah. So the
You
guy
carry the one.
This is how much this jumped in that time though. The guy said, "Well, I want $12,000 for it."
Wow.
And so my dad thought about it for a few minutes and he said he had it at the time on him, and he gave him $12,000, and
Holy cow.
he raced to his car with the hole in the horn and put it in the back seat. And
So what year is this, do you think, Cody?
I think this is the mid 70s.
Dude, $12,000 in the mid 70s
Yeah.
is a lot of money.
And he was saying,
I'd
like-
buy you a damn house.
And that's what he said. He's like, that's, to my knowledge, that's the most to date anyone had ever paid for a deer.
Has to be.
And he raced back to Montana. Like, he's got this.
So, but he knew, right? He knew that being 346, it would be the
World
largest.
record.
Yeah. And there's actually, you see that down in the corner there, that bottom left?
Yeah.
That's actually a preemptive cover
That
that
North
came out
American
that they
Whitetail
kind of had
one?
to, said new world record. And it, nowadays people say, well, that one didn't age well. They put that out before they got it confirmed. And so that's one of the few covers that's like, they had to retract some of the.
So it's almost like a print and air type of thing.
Yeah. But so as it goes, he gets it back out there, and at the time, this guy, Phil Wright, who was one of the preemptive B&C scorers, had actually written one of the main books on scoring big whitetails. He lived in Missoula, Montana at the time. My dad takes the deer to him, and he comes up with 346 and like 3/8.
So, like, I mean, for a deer, that non-typical, damn close margin of
Yeah.
error.
And so, and I guess the biggest thing is, do you give him like a clean 4x5 or a 5x5 frame? So
Yeah, good luck.
If you make him a 4x5 though, he gets deductions on that symmetry. So that's where they dinged him at the time. Was my dad had to wait like 2 years because B&C only met like every 3 years to enter stuff into the book.
What a ridiculous deer.
And they
Nuts.
Those must weigh a ton.
oh, they're massive, man. It's hard to, pictures don't really do them any justice. And I see Gordon Whittington up there holding him out in the yard.
Yeah, Gordon.
Yeah. And so I would say, I guess to finish that story, it ends up getting scored out in Missouri, and there's one of the Fish and Game guys that actually ended up with the Missouri buck, and it's still hanging in their like Fish and Game office there.
Go figure.
And
Yeah, they hijack all those deer that are
a lot of belief that
questionables.
they just didn't want. This big to-do had been made about this being the new world record. And so anyway, they end up giving him a deduction on that one side, and he went from 346 down to 328.
So they panel scored it there?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Basically with like the Missouri buck on the wall in the background.
Sure.
And that's like their baby. And
Yeah.
so there was a lot of strong words and a lot of folks. There was even a few people at BNC that end up getting fired kind of thing.
Wow.
Has it ever come back up for a new panel score or anything?
No, I mean, it's been privately, ever since he sold the collection, it's been privately owned since then.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just don't think, I don't think if it ever surfaces. And the other question was, him and I were talking about this the other day, how big was this deer when he was killed?
Yeah.
Like how much?
In terms of shrinkage?
Yeah.
Yeah, because if it's been just basically dry rotting on a wall for 50 years in a bar,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sure it's, with that much surface area, I'm sure it's lost several inches.
And if you were assuming that he actually was in the like mid to upper 340s.
It'd have been over 350 probably.
Yeah.
Huh. Man, that's what's so crazy about, like, we obviously value Boone and Crockett score for what it is. Like, it's a metric, but we also acknowledge like that it weights certain aspects that like we may or may not care about. Symmetry being the biggest one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you know, that is or isn't the biggest deer in the world because of how symmetrical it is. And not only that, it's subjective. Like, it's
Yeah.
not like, well,
especially in the non-typical side of things, but even in typicals, you look at the most recently the King Buck or CJ.
Even CJ's. Look what's
shared bases.
What's
and
screwing them
stuff.
all is the opinion of whether or not it's shared. Like,
Yeah.
boy, it would be coming off of our purity conversation with Dr. Sever yesterday. It's like I realized that a change would be drastic. It would, it would be hard to do that, but like
It's kind of already happened.
you would
though.
almost love to see something that is more.
I mean,
a displacement test is the way to do it. But even in there, you're like, okay, well, do we
Yeah.
value pure mass, pure like material?
Well, I think the total inches of antler, of which that's what most of us talk, right? When we talk about a booner, we're talking about a gross 170
score.
deer. Nobody's talking net at that point. Now, if you're talking actual book deer, yeah, I mean, you have to. Like it has to be net. They don't care about the gross side of that.
Which is interesting. Like, why? Why does the net score even exist? I guess would be the question.
I think it's because of the symmetrical aspect of things. Yep.
See, that one to me seems like over the top. It's like, okay, we got to gross score. We figured out a great way that everybody can in their garage, or with a panel, they can figure it out. Why apply the net deduction?
I think it's just because, the natural desire for a symmetrical deer.
It's really interesting too, though, just going off a score, because think about this, if you have a buck with a 150 typical frame, but he's got a bunch of junk and he ends up in the 180s, versus you got a buck with no junk with a 180 typical frame, we're talking about two completely different deer here.
Look, yeah, completely different.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. And you do want to acknowledge that somehow.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's where the non-typical gross or a typical gross still could come into play, right? It's then, like, even so that deer, now being, quote, missing because of the panel, like, there are still deductions on a non-typical deer for the basic symmetrical typical frame, right? Then they add in all the non-typical or abnormal points on top of that. So, like, even in a case of this deer is a non-typical deer, they're still judging symmetry and deducting that.
Do we know the net typical score on this deer, the hole in the horn buck? I can't imagine it's very good.
No, I'm sure it's low.
It's tough.
It could be like 100 inches. Like, what's symmetrical about that deer?
Right.
Yeah, not much. I mean, it probably it's probably north of 120, but not by much. Just mainly because of brows, beam, spread, mass. Yeah. But and again, I think to your point, is it 4x5? Is it a 5x5? Like, any of those things that come into play. But yeah, I mean, I think it's why, over time here, not to discredit any of the deer, it's that, the hunting public as a group talks in gross.
Yeah. Well, again, I said that to you yesterday. I've got a buck back in Montana that's in my storage right now that's a 200-inch deer, but it's a Montana deer, but he nets about 164. Everybody I've ever showed that deer to, I'm like, that's a 200-inch deer.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
you don't say, yeah, this is a 164, and they're like,
right.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He would give anybody a heart attack if he saw him on the hoof,
Yeah.
Sure.
So that's what I think, and it's really the hard point, I think, for people to grasp. But it's probably why, I mean, if you look at book submissions, I bet they've gone down significantly because just people don't care about having their deer scored to a net. They just want to know what the gross score is, and that's what they care about.
Which is also why, for some reason, I still think that the community overall in the whitetail world gets more excited about big typicals.
Absolutely.
There's been a number of over 300 bucks killed since these days.
Yeah.
And, some of them you don't hear nearly as much about. And I don't know if that's more...
Even to see him. Like, there was that one that got killed in Tennessee a couple of years ago.
It's like a mainframe 130.
Yeah, we saw it in person. Like, the guy was carrying it around at the ATA show or whatever, and I was like, it didn't even look impressive, really. It was just kind of like a mess of antler.
Junky and...
Like, not to take away from it, but it was just like, it was weird looking.
Versus CJ's buck, which was as wide as this table, and you couldn't even get your hand around any mass measurement. Yeah. You're like, this is a dinosaur.
That's what you want.
Seriously.
And so, but scored 100 inches less than that Tennessee deer.
Scratches on the table. That's from that skull.
Oh, you had him
off the Alexander buck.
Yeah.
Yeah, CJ was sitting right there.
Yeah.
Shout out to CJ.
You're sitting in the king's chair there.
Yeah. So I did see he messaged you on Instagram.
Yeah. I've been talking to him, just trying to get updates on the case or whatever. Sounds like it's ongoing. They have just...
So it seems like...
And I don't know what evidence has come out or anything like that, but,
Just dragging.
Yeah. Long term, we'll know.
Yeah.
We'll know.
But again, to that point, like that deer, as impressive as it was, is 100 inches less than that Tennessee deer. And I mean, two completely different beasts when you look at them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean... insane that's kind of how that all went down from a panel score side, and I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that most people looking at that thing would say that it is bigger than the Missouri Monarch for sure.
Yeah. And I'd like to call it the crowd favorite. He's definitely the
The hole in the horn is just known.
Yeah.
You know, you think that one. I mean, people know the Missouri Monarch. People know, obviously, the Jordan Buck. Like, there's certain ones that just, you know, they ring loud and true.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess going back to, like, your dad paying $12,000 for it at the time, I mean, again, it's such an absorbent amount of money at that point. Like, did he think about, like, the value of that at that time? Like, you know, from an investment side, I guess?
Honestly, I mean, I think he knew he was building something already as like a reputation and a name and a presence.
Like he was going to be one of these people that just were a collector and they were known for having these, and there's only one of them.
Yeah.
Right. So either you get it or somebody else gets it.
Yeah. And I don't think he knew exactly how that was going to go yet. But I mean, I saw some of the old ads for when he used to do all the shows and all that. There was like a pretty hefty membership for these shows and stuff to book him for the year and stuff. So he was definitely, you know, he was aware of it on that end, on the business end of it, that it was an investment. I don't know if it was not investment in the sense like I spent this much and it's going to be worth this much, but monetizing himself in a way. But certainly didn't know. I mean, I was telling him I had heard recently that someone had made an offer for this deer for $1 million for that head.
Jeez.
And it's I think Bass Pro owns it now, and they're not.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is it in the King of Bucks collection now?
In Springfield out there.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, $1 million to Johnny Morris is nothing. So he doesn't care.
Yeah.
You know.
But and again, that deer got sold in the whole Legendary Whitetails collection, so they did all those heads at one time when he did sell it.
So did that Legendary Whitetails collection become the King of Bucks collection, essentially?
And they've added a lot to it since.
But that was the transformation. Because I remember, you know, as a kid walking through the King of Bucks trailer, you know, and they'd have the trailer, it'd be open on both sides, and you walk through, and there's giant bucks through it.
Yeah, and back then, most of those were still his.
Interesting.
Yeah. And he was sending them all over the country and stuff.
Wow.
So,
that's amazing.
Yeah, and so the hole in the horn, and of course, you had mentioned that hole. I mean, that's another. It's almost like the Rompola thing where there's
the old wives' tale.
A bunch of people think they know, but the leading story, that deer got hit by a train and it was found tangled up like on the underneath of like a mild fence.
Okay.
It was military property on the other side, and the underside of the fence was open cut wire. And someone that was there that found it claimed that there was a piece of wire sticking through that. Now, other people believe that it was
a bullet.
Others have stated like they know for a fact that hunting club couldn't get him to sit on the wall right, and so they actually drilled a hole and had a wire running through it
just to balance
him
out.
Hold him straight. But there's nothing to say that they couldn't have just used the hole back then to keep him straight on the wall.
And that hole gives them the name.
Yep.
It sticks with them the whole time.
That's the craziest deer I've ever seen.
That's nuts.
And he even talked about that too. They debated over that name for a while.
Yeah.
Because they knew he was going to be like an iconic type of deer. So they didn't want to just call him like the Ohio buck and obviously a lot of the ones that are taken by a hunter, it's usually the
last name.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's just
Hansen buck.
Yeah. To have to go out and name, just name it off the cuff. But I think they did a good job with the hole in the horn.
I think so too.
Yeah. That's awesome. Crazy, man.
His antlers look like sheep's head mushrooms.
Yeah, it's freaking wild. That's nuts. So, I mean, was that then, like, that was the first, like, really big purchase your dad kind of made on the collection side?
Well, he had already gotten the Fred Goodwin collection at that time.
Okay.
And so some of the ones, like he used to own the Fleming sheds and the Illinois Roadkill, and some of those didn't make it into the, Bass Pro end of things, but...
Have you heard of those Fleming sheds?
Mm-hmm.
Tell a story on that. So, I told you should have saved some for podcast.
So that was just a cool one. That was many years ago. The Fleming sheds are known as one of the biggest, like, typical... Can
you pull those up, Nick? I want to see those. Sorry, and then you can skip out, Nick.
And where are they from? Are they Nebraska? No, not Nebraska. That's the general or whatever.
I literally just talked to whitetails with my dad for like 3 hours the other day, and now I'm mixing up.
Yeah. Jeez, oh man.
So,
look at the twos on that thing. Yeah. That is disgusting.
Yeah, so the story is my dad came into this hunting camp, and I'm gonna leave off the location now because I'm not 100%. I'm mixing up. I thought it was Canada, but he comes into camp, and a local guy that actually worked in the camp had his kids were there, and one of them had found one side, and it was sitting on the coffee table there, and my dad was there for a hunt, and he scored it and they looked at it. And about 2 days in, I guess he said, he pulled the kids aside one night. They were all having dinner and drinks or whatever. And he said, I'll give you $500 if you guys can find that other side. So
this was like a recent find. Like they
had found it the day before.
Holy crap.
And so he went hunting that day, and those kids went out and scoured for like 8 hours and actually found the other side. And when he got back to camp, they had it.
Whoa.
So
he was hunting an area where that deer potentially was still walking?
Oh yeah. I mean, look, at the end of the day too, he's killed 60 plus deer that would go 160 or better in his life. And he's had, I think he told me the other day, it's 7 or 8 deer that he's killed have been on the cover of North American Whitetail. Jeez. So, I mean, he wasn't just a collector. He's known pre-trail cam, like all this stuff. I mean, I showed you the book yesterday, Hunting the 4 Periods of the Rut. It was his, like, how to locate, find, and pattern bring bucks back when you went out and you really scouted hard and didn't have any advantages.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Hoyt.
What can we say, man? Another year back with Hoyt. We're both shooting RX8s. I'm shooting 70 pounds in the bourbon, which I love bourbon.
That's great.
And you're shooting 80 pounds in the straight black.
Blacked out as always, man. I got the, so I'm shooting the 500 grain Easton Arrow this year. And at 80 pounds, I'm flinging that thing at like 300 feet per second. I mean, it's deadly. Put a water buffalo in front of me and he's done.
I mean, we shot it earlier. You literally put an arrow through a brand new target, like never been shot before.
I know. So one other thing that Hoyt is doing this year is they're making all their own strings in-house. And so the quality is top notch, and it just really is something that is setting them apart from their competitors.
Well, what we always try to do when we go to our bow shop, Ultimate Outdoors, is we try to shoot other bows just to make sure that we are really giving everybody a fair chance.
Sure.
The reality is it's a no-brainer. Hoyt stands above all of them every single time.
Definitely. And so right now you can use code HUNTR, HUNTR, for 20% off any apparel on the Hoyt website. And as always,
get serious, get Hoyt. So we brought this up yesterday a little bit at the end of our last podcast. There was an article in North American Whitetail, and I think I said 92, sometime around, but Shockey wrote, and it was the 900 Club. You remember? So your dad was one of the guys mentioned in the 900 Club, and we were kind of, going through it yesterday. Like, that was such a huge deal back then. Like your best $6 totaling 900 inches with a bow. And if you think about it today, like I did mine just after I read that, and I was like, I'd be in the 900 Club today, and I'm nobody. Like just how things have evolved essentially. Now I think we said, well, instead of it being average of 150, like it needs to be an average of 170, and that's like 1,020, which that maybe that's the next benchmark. But at the time, he was going through the list, and your dad was mentioned, and I forget it, at that time it gave him whatever his top $6 were, and he's like, he was well over the 900 Club. Yeah. But the guys mentioned in that category were like, they were the dudes.
Yep.
Right? Like, it was like, these were the big buck killers with a bow.
Yeah.
So it's kind of just taking yourself back to that time frame and how impressive killing a 150-inch deer was with a bow at that point.
It's pretty unreal to see like pictures of them. We were just flipping through some pictures of the book and stuff, and it's just like the deer that exist. You know what I mean? It's just like, where are these things? Like, they're just like, they're not the deer that we're hunting. Mm-hmm. Whether they're coming from Canada or like, some of those remote places in Canada or
like a deer like that. I mean, Iowa. A deer like that gets killed today, and people make a massive deal about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Just like CJ's buck, it becomes a huge deal. But, if you go anywhere between, even 170 to 190, like, sometimes there's a big deal about it, but most of the time, like, people don't really, if it's a 190 typical, maybe, but other than that, like, it's not really discussed. It's not really brought up. It's kind of like, yeah, it's a great deer. Yeah. And it's so hard to fathom, like, we're at that point.
And I do think you have to touch on the social media and internet aspect to this now, because back then, too, the people that were hungry for that stuff, they're only getting it through the magazine or they're going to see it in person.
It's the only reason we knew these deer existed is you got a North American Whitetail in the mail and you're like, holy shit. Like, this is that deer. Somebody killed a deer that looks like that.
Yeah.
Otherwise you had no idea those deer were even out there, let alone somebody killed one.
Right.
It is kind of weird to see it in the context of like a social media feed, because it's like, you're just scrolling and you're like, oh, there's a 220. Scroll.
Yeah.
You get a little like numb to it. A little bit. And I will say there's probably a higher level for people who like the traditional aspect of, there's a higher level of distrust with what they're seeing if it's
sure.
And I hate to put CJ on that category, but it's the nature of like at least half of the people out there to go, something's up. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense. It's not right.
Speaking of the distrust, can we talk about the Rompola buck?
Yeah.
So would you mind just sharing the story, like your dad's perspective on that? So he had it, right, for a period of time, or had...
He didn't want it. He handled it and immediately was like, no.
Really?
Not real.
Not real.
No.
That was his, because Eberhard said
Said
the
the same thing. Yeah. He held it and he's like, something's up with these.
And Gordon Whittington told me the same thing too. I talked to him.
Interesting.
But my dad, because he used to actually, back before it was big, to make replicas, he started out when he got some of these giant sheds. They had some that maybe laid in a field and had some broken points, got hit by a tractor.
Yep.
They got chewed on, and they wanted to fix them. So it started with kind of like an antler repair. So he was very in tune with natural beating and even like the veining and the natural structure. And he's handling stuff like the hole in the horn. And first thing he told me, he said, if you saw it in person, antlers don't even grow materially like this. They don't. And he said that the coloring was even off on the stretches where it had been like extended, and you could almost tell that it was like a putty almost, or something like a...
Wow.
It wasn't antler material.
Wow.
So, and now what's funny is I listened to a podcast in the spring here. I was driving up to North Carolina, and the guy that I listened to was gung-ho. It's real. I know for a fact.
We talked about it.
Did you?
With Eberhard.
There was a video they put out recently, and it was like, it basically was like,
guy was interviewing
we
him.
know Mitch, and Mitch is he's a really great guy. It's just, this is legitimate. There was it was just a testament to his character is what it was. And they were saying,
there's a ton of stuff around it. I mean, there's tons of people probably listen to this that firmly believe that Milo Hansen's in the mob and that he threatened Rompola, that if he actually tried to enter that, he'd basically kill him.
That's what I heard.
Isn't that crazy?
That's what I heard.
Yeah.
We're talking about like deer hunting here.
Yeah.
You know?
So, and I know in a way, Rompola did a little bit like what CJ did.
Get right on that mic.
He jumped out a little faster than he should have.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that didn't make sense is there was like some endorsement and product kind of things that were in place before he took that deer. So look, and I don't have the liberty of sitting here saying that I'd handled that deer personally.
Yeah, but I mean, your dad is one of the foremost experts in this space who's handled it and basically said it's not real.
Right.
That's about as good as gold to me.
And to also hear it from Gordon Whittington, who also...
Gordon has handled a ton.
He's absolutely an authority on this, and him saying no. But...
and Eberhard, the same way.
It's wild to know that there's three really notable people who are experienced with like those class of deer and with antlers and stuff, saying that like obviously it's not.
Right.
How is it still? And then still on the other side, there's like guys are like, oh, clearly it is.
Well, I mean, who's even seen it here recently?
Well, it supposedly
Where is it? Where's the Rompola?
It burnt down
that's what I heard.
in a fire in a house.
Yeah, so it doesn't even exist anymore.
Convenient.
So, and I'm of the personal belief that he never burned it down, but he had to have a story. A lot of people believe it was like a separate building on his property, I guess, and he had it sitting in there and it burnt down.
Yeah, because with all the technology and stuff now, people would be basically saying, dude, you have to put this out there. People have to see it. People have to handle it.
Right.
And he didn't want any of that.
Sure.
Right.
Well, assuming not. Yeah, if it's not real.
So, and I don't know if Milo Hansen, and I don't know anything about him personally, but I know that they were, really propping up the Hansen buck at that time. And there was financial incentive for him not to be ousted as the number one.
Can you pull up the Hansen buck real quick?
Has your dad handled that one?
Mm-hmm.
He has.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So the Rompola buck came from
Michigan.
Yep. And the Hansen buck came from
Saskatchewan.
Saskatchewan. Okay.
Yep. Around the same time frame.
Mm-hmm.
In the early 90s. I think Hansen's was 93.
This is the Hansen buck.
Yep.
Hansen was 93.
213 and
yep.
change.
Like, look at that. That's like classic, like Pennsylvania orange pumpkin soup. Like,
and so at the time there was between the two bucks there would have been like they were fighting for a spot.
Number one.
It would have been number one.
Typical.
Yeah, Hansen's number one still to this day.
It is.
Yeah. Huff came close in Indiana.
Yeah, it's a crossbow.
Yeah, I know.
Well, and Hansen's a gun buck, is that right?
Yep, gun buck.
And how was
They did it on a drive too. He wasn't the only one that shot at that deer. He happened to be the one that ran into him. So.
And the Rompola was a bow buck, correct?
Correct.
Compound bow buck.
Rompola was a sculpture.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Rompola.
Acclaimed bow buck. Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff too. Like one of the interviews, a guy, because Rompola was actually on the Michigan scoring panel, and
Yes.
this guy had a statement that he made that Rompola pulled him into a back room at one of the shows, and he had found this big, wide, old shed, and he told him like, "Oh, if this buck is out there, he'd be the new world record." And he was being real weird about it. He had it locked in like a lock.
We've heard a similar story from Eberhard. Said the same thing.
Yeah.
The exact same thing.
So I think
pulled him back and was like, check this out.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to go try to hunt this deer, like trying to set the stage.
And I think he put it on a skull and matched it on another side and projected it. But the other thing that really sold it for me was he had supposedly in the state of Michigan had killed like 5 bucks with an inside spread over 25.
Yeah, I remember that.
Statistically improbable. Let me pose this to you. Isn't there footage? Didn't they put that out in the recent thing of him turning, holding the deer?
Yeah,
they were like interviewing him in the woods.
What do you think of that?
Man, I've heard so many stories on this. There's weird things about the video. It's strange. And I've looked for it recently. I haven't been able. I wanted to see it the other day because I thought we might touch on it.
Can you pull that up, Nick? Can you see do Mitch Rompola buck video?
Like there's one.
See if you can find it. There's a recent YouTube video, like within the past 6 months, of him in the field holding it, turning it. Recovery video right there.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
It might be that's the pictures.
Recovery right there.
This one here?
Maybe.
That's from 2012.
No, that one, 24.
This one here.
Yep, that one.
Make sure. Hold on, let me pause.
Oh, it's only 12 seconds?
Yeah.
Weird. Yeah.
But there it is. I mean, that's it right there.
What year was this? That he shot this?
It was in early 90s, I think.
So they'd have been shooting this with a hand cam?
Look, if you
there's the interview right there. That's the one. Marcus always comments on our TikToks. Maybe he still listens to us or he doesn't like us. But
I have to point this out though. So there's not a lot of argument actually that maybe he didn't kill a really big buck. But look at even him laying on the ground right there, and then look at that little thumbnail up there. Look how he shoots straight out, flat from
which it doesn't look like that deer.
No,
you're right.
That deer goes up.
You're absolutely
goes
right.
out.
Look at that.
That's got to be a different deer.
or it's that deer before he cut it up and moved. He
Moves him out.
because look at how he comes off flat over his.
Yeah, because that's a giant buck in that what we're looking at right there.
Yeah, that's a killer buck.
But it definitely is not that deer.
Right.
Well, from that
or
angle, anyways.
not modified.
Yeah.
Well, even any angle. I mean, you can tell that it's going up.
Play, Nick.
Man, that's got to be.
Look at the angle.
Yeah,
on
see
his
how it
face.
goes up?
3 feet,
Yeah.
I'll bet you.
It doesn't look nearly as wide in that video.
Got
No.
a tape measure back at the truck.
He said that's 3 feet wide. Interesting, huh?
But I know
That
you
does
said
not
you
look
saw the
the same.
numbers, but like it was something like in Michigan at that time, there was like 8 million recorded whitetails that had been.
Yeah, because the
killed.
Michigan Big Buck Records or whatever has been around for a long time and was
Yeah.
very heavily participated in.
And there was only like over that 25 inside spread, there was only like 6 deer or something like that. And he had supposedly killed 4 or 5 of them in
Wow.
his time there.
Yeah, and
Sorry,
I think he was also
Get to know it.
he was in like in the Traverse City area, which is like it's not like southern Michigan, like in ag country, like it's northern Michigan, like getting towards big woods,
Right.
up by the Great Lakes.
So how did your dad come to have his hands on it?
This is another one of those just in the journey of, I mean, any big buck comes to the surface and they were going there.
He's there.
And at the time, he didn't buy every single deer either, but I mean, they were going to go do the interview and they were going to put it in North American Whitetail. So there was just too many people that really knew what they were doing that had no skin in the game, like Gordon or my dad. They had no reason to not want it to be real.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, they wanted to write a story and get it out there.
Yeah, they were big fans of giant bucks. So there was no reason. And I mean, I heard that, you know, Milo Hansen and them served him with like a cease and desist, and somebody offered him $10,000 to do an x-ray of it.
Yeah, but I remember that Eberhard told us that.
And they basically got him. And here's what, you know, if you've ever had an attorney in your life, this is where I would have had an attorney if I was Rompola. He just agreed. They basically made him sign that he can never say, until the Hansen buck gets beat, he can never say that his buck is, you know, he legally agreed not to ever say it, that his buck was the
Why
world
would
record.
you do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, why would you do that?
I just think they put enough heat on him and they were going to run him
They're
through
like, or we'll kill you.
or they were going to run him through the ringer financially so bad that like they did have money behind them. They're like, we'll tie you up in court until you have nothing left.
Well, I mean, just circumstantially, why would you sign something like that unless you knew, like, you're not going to win?
And then go burn a building down with a deer in it so no one can x-ray it. I don't know.
I mean,
I'll probably get hate for this all over.
Well, yeah, I'm sure you will.
You're just looking at the evidence. We're just speculating.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that your dad and Gordon all had hands on it.
Who is Gordon, by the way? I recognize
Gordon
his face,
was the editor of North American Whitetail for a long time. He was on North American Whitetail TV for a long time.
Yeah, that's where I recognize
him. Gordon's out of Georgia.
Okay.
Great guy. Yeah, great guy. And so, like, you have these very reputable people with their hands on it who all have kind of come to the same conclusion. It's not by chance.
Do we know how that was posed to Mitch to be like, hey, listen, we don't think it's real? Like, how did that come about?
Well, I know that.
Who confronted him?
I think people were banging on the door because he's also, the story is he's pretty reclusive.
Just onlookers were like, doesn't look real, like looks weird.
But there's people starting to come to the house like, look, give us evidence, show us that this is real.
Dude, you can't put a deer out like that in the state of Michigan, which at the time is like deep deer hunting history, and don't expect to get a bunch of attention.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we all saw, I remember seeing that picture when I was, 10 years old. I'm like, that looks fake.
Yeah, I remember thinking that too.
I've had more people send me a picture of that deer and say, what do you think?
Yeah.
And so I just...
Yeah. Hey, again, this was just killed in Pennsylvania. What do you think? It's like, no, we know that deer.
So he signed the thing and said, cool, I won't say that it's the world record. And then Hansen was the #1 record at that time?
Still is.
It had already been deemed the #1. And like, again, shows, appearances, all that stuff, magazine covers, all that stuff had already been like put into motion with that. And so, but yeah, I think if I heard correctly, the agreement was he can never publicly say that it's the world record until the Hansen buck gets beat. Which again is null and void now if the deer actually is
gone. Like, you'll never. So your dad also got hands on the Hansen buck. Did the rumor on that one too is that deer was only like 3.5 years old.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Wow.
On a Hansen buck.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
He's done interviews and stuff. A lot, I would imagine. He's just kind of before our time, huh?
Yeah. In fact,
is Hansen from Canada?
In fact, I chatted with Hansen through Facebook.
Did you?
Yeah, about coming on the podcast.
Oh yeah. What did he say?
He was up for it.
Yeah.
He's just a retired farmer.
So did you threaten to kill him? That's what I want to know. No. Here's what we heard.
He's like, yeah, I could tell you the story. I'd have to kill you, but
those guys
come on.
probably have profited a lot from the fact just that rumor exists.
Well, but even think about I know for sure Hansen's buck was 93. So I mean, think about 31 years that buck standing. And with all the technology, all the increased lethality that we have.
What is it? What's the score on it?
It's 213 and 7/8.
Yep.
Net typical?
Net typical.
Now, don't forget, this comes another Boone and Crockett thing. Just like the hole in the horde's a crowd favorite, typical, like bucks like the king buck are the crowd favorite.
Sure.
As a typical. And for those that don't know.
That's time math.
Yeah.
That's what people like.
For those that don't know the story, I mean, he shot that a couple times and one bullet hit him right in the beam, put a hole in it and caused a crack, and it was something like they weren't going to let it officially be entered because of the crack. But he would have beat the.
Did it have a shared base discussion as well, or shared?
I'd have to see it again, but
it did.
Yeah,
I think so.
It did,
because that was a Wisconsin buck in like
it was
13
similar.
Or
it was
something.
similar
Like
to
it wasn't
CJ's.
that long ago.
It was going to have a similar discrepancy with a shared base.
That's nuts.
That common base thing is tough. There's also that giant 6 that was killed up in Maryland.
I remember that one.
I mean, almost the most
the
perfect,
real dark one.
Yeah, almost the most perfect typical you've ever seen, and near 220 kind of thing.
Yep.
And
shared base
on that one side, and he ends up losing like.
Yeah, I mean, even CJ's, take the question of did he kill it legally or not out of the picture. Like the shared base on that deer. I mean, that deer is going to gross like 236.
What did we score it at? 240 something?
241 or something like
gross,
that.
Gross, non-typical?
Yeah.
Did you or your dad?
Gross typical. And we were assuming non-shared base, but it's going to, people are going to look at it, they're going to say it's a shared base, and then it tumbles itself down.
Did you or your dad speculate on that at all? Like follow that story at all?
Well, ironically, like I was telling you, I run every night down to that church in the neighborhood I live in. I run down there and do my laps, and I had my headphones on. I spent about an hour talking about it with him. And, I mean, he's coming from someone who, when he was in his heyday, he had to do everything right. There was a couple like Fish and Game guys that were looking for him to make a mistake, so they were always.
Boy, that story sounds familiar.
And so he felt not like it just. If you want to step into the limelight, you're going to take some of that. Yeah. But like, for example, there was a show we did every year in Montana that this Fish and Game guy that was also Border Patrol would travel like 4 hours just to come to our display, just to look at everything and see if he had anything that maybe didn't look right. It's just like
just looking for something
on that end of things. And I believe in this. Like, if CJ did do what he, is accused of, the penalties and lose the deer and all that. But I care about people, and it's still a young guy with a family and stuff. If he loses some hunting rights and all that, and there's repercussions for choices, but I don't think it needs to ruin a kid's life over a deer. And so,
well, we talk about, not to interrupt, but we talk about that in like, let's say it was a 170-inch buck. Wouldn't get near the attention. Sure, he's still going to get slapped on stuff, but I don't think there'd be near as much pressure on Ohio DNR to like make an example out of them. The fact that it's a world-class animal that we've held, I mean, dinosaur. Like we're hunting completely different species compared to whatever the hell that thing was. It's that pressure that's going to put it over the edge.
The fact that it's in the running, I mean, he's in a similar situation to like Hansen, to Rompola, to
well, and then you add in the fact he's sold it potentially for $20,000.
Well, and it was like uber publicized and like went on all these podcasts, including ours and stuff, and like so everybody knew about it.
Was it Keith Snyder? Is that who we're talking about?
Keith Snyder. That's what it was. Yeah. So can we talk about this? We talked about. I think CJ. I think it's public that he did agree to sell the thing.
Because he had a receipt
to Snyder.
Well, DNR gave Snyder a receit for taking the animal.
How much was it? Was $15,000?
I thought it was 20.
$20,000. I have a picture of him in Keith Snyder's room with the deer.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. They are open about it.
Yeah. Snyder had approached him multiple times, but I think he did make the transaction.
And it's in possession of the DNR now. But yeah, they had transacted for like $20,000, and there was some sort of brand deal. Like he was going to connect him with, I don't know, Lucky Buck or some stuff like that. So I was asking Cody this morning about like how much you think that thing's worth? Like, because we were speculating. We're like, we don't know. We're not like collectors. And so tell Jeremy what you told me.
Yeah. Well, like the one shed I mentioned, I can't disclose that one. The big shed that we talked about, that one I've been actually told not to share.
Okay.
Because it's not a done thing.
Yeah. The one that was in your possession?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I can't share on that one. But the,
Oh, that one. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
But that older shed. But like I had a shed not 3 months ago that someone offered me $20,000 for just the shed. That deer right there, I would have.
You can say what that one is, right? Or no?
It was the Montana state record non-typical.
Oh, so what would that side be score wise?
I think he's 120
on the side.
Oh yeah, the buck was 257 and change.
As a typical,
non-typical.
As a non-typical.
That's the state record non-typical from Montana.
So $20,000 for that side.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so
for that side,
and
CJ's would have been in the running for. Typical world record?
Well, I think it would have been from a gross side, it would have been the highest grossing typical dependent on that shared base.
Right.
And
so arguably a more valuable deer than the Montana.
For sure. And that was a single shed, and I know there's weird things in the market like individual giant sheds.
Certain people just like big sheds. Yeah.
But I mean, I had heard of another, I think it was the Gould buck that someone recently had offered $150,000 for that mount. And I think, now I did say this, with time, give it another 10 years and the Alexander buck will be worth significantly more because of the lore and the history around it.
For sure.
And the story gets more
regardless of probably where it scores out
like
at.
$20,000 is low for a deer of that. I mean, that is one of the best frames that I've ever.
I would assume in 5 or 10 years that deer is probably worth $200,000.
Yeah. Add inflation. You know, we got.
Right.
Yeah, well, and the history behind it and everything. I mean, it is.
Well, we were speculating, and I think I said at the time, I was like, I wouldn't sell that deer for less than what did I say, 100 or 150 grand.
But that's actually reasonable for the market.
I think so too.
That's that kind of.
And I agree with you. It will be more valuable in time, but like. You should be able to look ahead and
Well, and the hard part is for
that.
a young kid like CJ, it's like $20,000 is
life-changing money.
Yeah, it's a lot of money for him. I mean,
I don't
he sat
blame
here
him
and
at
told
all.
us that he made $8,000 all of last year.
Yeah.
So like, $20,000's a lot of money.
Yeah, I don't blame him at all. I mean, it's just that's the way those things
go. He's got
go,
kids and stuff too. It's
well, and I think I don't know Snyder at all, but I think from his side, it's like there was a gamble there too because of everything that was going around. Like, I don't think you really wanted to dish out $100,000 to this kid, knowing the controversy around it.
This may give you some some credit back to CJ. The way I understand it, I guess, and he is the one that told me this, so I don't have verifiable proof. But the way I understand it is Keith gave him the money, paid him the $20,000.
Yep.
And he had the antlers in his possession. And then
that's who the DNR took it from.
And the DNR took it from Keith. And then Keith called TJ and said, hey, man, here's what happened. And
I heard the DNR gave him a receipt basically saying, hey, we took these antlers from you.
And CJ was like, gave him the money back.
Oh, really?
Went back to his house and was like, hey, yeah, that wasn't the part of the deal. That wasn't right. And gave him the money back, which I think is pretty honorable.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Because if it goes south, DNR is going to keep those antlers.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if it goes the other way, I assume Keith could get them back. But hell, at that point, I'd be like, hey, deal just went up. Yeah. If I'm CJ, I would have gave him the money back too, because if it goes the right way, those antlers are worth a lot more than $20,000.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, from this point.
When he's lucky he didn't go spend that money in the interim. I'm thinking that Dumb and Dumber moment.
I know. Well, that's what's unbelievable.
It's an IOU for $100,000.
Might want to hang on to this one.
yeah. You're gonna hold on to that one. Yeah. That's an IOU. That's better than money
for a Lamborghini.
That's what $20,000. You're gonna want to hold on to that one. The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Lone Wolf Custom Gear.
Man, Jared, we are tree stand fanatics, and I think the one thing that we have learned over all these years is to kill big bucks, we got to be mobile. We've been hunting out of Lone Wolves for many years, the original Lone Wolf, and then obviously with the custom gear stuff, we're using the 0.5 and the 0.75. Yeah. And the one thing that we talked about is like, what if there were no cables? Here we are.
I really just don't know how you can beat it, frankly. But, a lot of that came, too, from a relationship that we've built with the DeQuistos. We've had both Cody and Andre on the podcast a few times. The passion for hunting, the outlook on the sport and stuff, I think is eye to eye with how we look at it. Everything that has gone into building this brand and to building these tree stands is something that we want to be a part of.
This is the 40th anniversary of these guys creating tree stands that have been critical to how we hunt whitetail deer today. If you look over the past, you'll see Andre's designs being implemented across so many stands over the years. Such a cool thing, but really has changed the way that we all hunt whitetail deer from above now.
Right now, you can use code HUNTR, HUNTR, to get 7% off anything on the entire website. Be the Lone Wolf. Yeah, that's it's wild to consider what some of these things are worth, like to collectors and stuff like that.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I know we kind of spiraled out of that, but I mean, it's $12,000 in the mid 70s would have bought you a house.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, in the mid 70s, that's a ton of money.
Was your dad married at that point to your mom? Yeah. What did she think?
The story had it was, I've got pictures back in the day with my mom holding all these big heads and stuff too. Yeah. I think she was, along for the ride.
He had a plan though. It wasn't like, hey, I'm just going to buy these and put them in a room. Like, I've got a plan of doing something with them. These are one in a lifetime type animals.
Mm-hmm. But I'm sure that when he brought the hole in the horn home, she was like,
okay. Check this out. Here's a, I don't know if this website's reputable or not. In 2013dollars.com, $12,000 in 1970, just based on inflation, today would be worth $97,167.
Yep. Sounds right.
An increase of $85,000 over 54 years.
Yep.
So 12 grand is what your dad paid for the hole in horn buck. So that'd be the equivalent of buying it for 100 grand today.
Boy, that's how much he liked it.
Yeah, that sounds like he liked it a lot.
Well, and that's kind of the fun thing.
And ultimately, I'm sure he sold it for more than that.
Oh yeah, the collection
quite a bit more.
But even still, he sold it back in like the late 70s and really did well. But now what the collection's worth, we were joking about it when we were shed hunting in Canada back in April. He's like, man, if I still had all those heads, what it would be now, who knows? I mean, plus there'd be, back then there was 40 or 50 heads in there, and now they've been adding giant deer to it ever since.
Sure.
So, but yeah, it's just fun to actually have like hands-on stories with those deer.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't, nowadays I feel like you see a lot of this famous stuff, but unless you go to a show and you see a deer or whatnot, but you don't really get real interaction with these things.
Yeah.
I think that's why the rumor mills get so heavy in.
Well, everybody sees pictures, you see, and everybody, it's cool in a way because it gets exposure. Like people will see the deer on social media or whatever, but to actually dude, to sit in a truck bed with a deer like that and to
Right.
for CJ to have that buck here, we did like a reveal. I didn't see it until we were mid podcast. He brought it out. It's just like it takes your breath away, and like
Right.
It's unbelievable
to understand what some of these animals are capable of, like producing off the top of their heads. It's just like not a whole lot of people probably have those experiences with giant bucks.
Well, I think what's interesting is like, and you know, we talked about this the other day. Trail cameras have been a huge reveal, kind of behind the scenes, right? You know, the look up the skirt per se. But you know, if you look back to like when your dad's encounter, like big deer have kind of always existed.
Right.
You know, at least since the 50s and 60s, and probably before that. You know, a lot of people ask, they're like, well, do you think there's more big deer now than there were then? Probably, just because of how management tactics have changed and stuff. But
I don't think, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. You're fine.
I was going to say before that, I bet they were rampant. Like, I love, you probably would know with your background in art and stuff, those paintings of like the Indians hunting giant bucks and stuff. I bet that was a reality. I bet before
like the market
the white man, like the
hunting,
European, we started just wiping them out for pelts and whatever we were using them for. I bet there was quite a bit more than there are now.
Probably. Yeah, I'm sure there were giant bucks walking around. Yeah, because they only took what they needed to use.
And it was like humans were probably not a major factor on them. It was like just natural predators.
Yeah.
Yep, I agree with that. I don't know. There's still pockets. There's still places. Like if you go up to northern Alberta and Saskatchewan, places like that, and there's a lot more competition and pressure in like the Midwest.
Yep.
There's giant deer coming out of there, but I couldn't say by volume, but I do know, like, you know, my dad hunted for almost 30 straight years, the entire season up in either Alberta or Saskatchewan, and back then it was like a clear. We pass on 180s. Like he was holding for.
Wow.
Used to drive me nuts because I was a kid.
Hunting for world records, hunting for the biggest.
And I over the years, my favorite thing when he was gone when I was a kid, every day he'd like call home and I'm like, "Did you get one?" You know, I'm fired up, and it's like, "No, I let this one walk and I let that one walk," and I'm like,
"Jeez."
You know, like stuff that any of us would just. It's a heartbeat.
Yeah.
But. So.
Yeah, I mean, technology and vision into that world with cameras and stuff has completely changed that side of it. But yeah, I think to your point, there's still pockets. We talk about the appreciation for like big deer now, and you said it earlier, you kind of become numb to some of it because of the just frequency you see them in social media and postings, when before it wasn't like that. But you know, you think of a Milo Hansen buck still standing, like, you know, if somebody even has a picture of a deer that's going to gross 220 typical and give it a run, that's a monster.
It's a giant.
Absolute monster. And they're out there. You know, I mean, I'm sure there are multiple typical world records walking around right now, probably in Ohio, Iowa, Kansas, you know, type of time for, you know, states. Whether good chance, especially in like in Ohio and in Iowa, somebody knows of them. Yeah. Like they're on camera. Somebody knows that deer exists. Just depends if they kill it or not. And then next year, did it get injured? Was it a rough winter? Like it could miss next year.
That's kind of the beauty probably of like whatever in Alberta, like a wilderness setting where it's just like it's just too vast to run cameras on everything. Like you could run as many as you want, but there's just impenetrable wilderness that those deer can escape and survive, and you just would never know of them.
Yeah.
And they just don't have the concentration of people paying attention to them.
Right.
They just like the one we talked about. So my dad just wrote an article for North American Whitetail on Matt Beard's buck. It was the biggest typical taken in North America in 23. And I believe it was 204 gross. He netted 196 and 6/8, I believe, typical.
What state was that killed in?
That's Saskatchewan.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Alberta.
Okay.
That's actually where we went shed hunting in April.
Okay.
And he was with us, but
Matt was with you?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, and so Matt actually had purchased a big portion of my dad's antler collection previously, and we basically, he's really into the history of the whitetail world, and so he knows everything about like every deer that's ever come along. But so even when we were up there, he had a bunch of the original old copies of North American Whitetail and had my dad sign them, and he brought his books, and I mean. And they do a lot of work to dig up all the old pictures. Like the information that nobody else gets to see. But yeah, that and so he came to my dad and asked him to write that article, which I think comes out here in September.
Cool.
It'll be on the cover. But like that deer, nobody ever saw that deer. And even once they figured out he was there, Matt hunted him for 3 years. And he would like go home, and 2 months later they'd get one trail cam picture of this deer. But as I was telling you,
was it like a bush buck?
Yeah, it was like a true bush buck. They never had proof that he ever left the big bush.
Yeah,
Jeez.
so like they wouldn't get pictures of him on the ag fields
Never.
or where most of their ladder
Never.
stands are at.
And Matt
stuff.
only actually got him because he finally mixed it up and went in there and stood in an area and actually kind of got lucky and got right in front of him.
Wow.
But like this deer, now the cool thing is in the 3 years they watched him, he went from like a 170s to like a 200-inch deer.
Mm-hmm.
But so it was meant to be, but it's still, I mean, but there's deer like that walking around up there. And some of the stuff, we used to go shed hunting up there every year when I was a kid. Some of the stuff we found we had a shed sitting in my dad's shop for years that he found up there that scored 111 and change.
Whoa.
And my dad actually hunted that buck, saw him a couple times on the hoof, but
Typical deer?
he would have been a non-typical ultimately. He had almost like, he had a kicker that on the inside that looked like almost second beam.
Yeah.
But real long time, beautiful deer. But we hunted hard to find that other side, never found it. But
Jeez.
and I was about 10 yards behind him walking up this fence line, which cardinal rule, don't do it anymore. As a shed hunter, you're never walking behind anybody ever.
That's not going to go well.
Especially him.
Unless somebody's just kind of looking up at the sky.
So, but I got to watch him pick it up, and
Yeah.
I'd be lying if I said I wasn't jealous.
Yeah, monster.
Yep.
I mean, it is hard to think about, the amount of time that we all spend in the woods and for most of us, if in a season, if we lay eyes on a deer bigger than 160, it's like, it's a good year. For the majority of us listening to this thing, I mean, it maybe if you're in Iowa or Kansas and you're hunting a lot, like chances of seeing a 170 or better, pretty good. I mean, the odds of like a hunter out of, whatever, there's 10 million whitetail deer hunters in the country, probably less than 50 of them see a 200 every year.
Well, dude, and it's not impossible. Like a lot of deer have the genetic potential and like the nutrition elements to reach a really amazing, like any of us can look at a giant bull of a buck, like a 7, 8, 9-year-old, just like tank that's reached its full potential. Like somebody even that doesn't know anything about deer and be like, that's a beast. Like that's just a mythological, like what is that thing?
Yeah.
And like the reality is, like, granted, not all of them or maybe even half of them have that antler potential, but almost all of them can reach like that kind of a mystique, that kind of like, and that's where we talk about like the stigma around like trophy hunting and stuff. And I get it. It's like, the idea of it is kind of like, we're not hunting for trophy for like, the idea is kind of grotesque. I understand the distaste for it, but like if you can relate it to just the appreciation for what an animal like that has gone through, how many years it takes, like what they have to have survived to get to that, and ultimately what they throw in terms of antlers because of that, and like the scars that they have, and
you're taking them at their peak.
That is what I wish people could just understand. Like that's a cooler animal to hunt. Like that's what you want to see. Yeah,
and what's interesting is you think back to those, the late 80s and early 90s time frame and stuff when people were killing big bucks. Rompola was killing his and, perceived buck, and Hansen had killed his. During that time, most people were just deer hunters.
Right.
Like in Pennsylvania, it was a 3-inch spike. That thing was smoked, right? So it's like, compared to now, where I would say there's a much larger portion of the whitetail population that is, hunting for, at least they're passing deer, whether they're passing 1 and 2 year olds to kill a 3-year-old, or they're passing 4 points, maybe because they have to, because antler restrictions are in place to kill an 8-point. Like things are a lot different now than they were in the 80s and 90s, and there were probably as many, if not more, deer hunters at that time, especially in the 90s, which was kind of the heyday. But if you look at, that's where it kind of goes back, is like, are there really more big bucks now than there were back then? we have such a different view into the whitetail herd because of trail cameras that we didn't have back then.
Right.
So it's hard to say.
Well, keep in mind too, you go to places like still to this day, like northern Alberta and Saskatchewan. There's people, just like that Iopa buck that just came out. There's a lot of deer out there that we don't know about.
Absolutely.
So it'd be hard to gauge it because back then it wasn't a public thing.
I mean, it was a big deal locally, right? But beyond that, I mean, we talk about that in Iowa. Like how many 80 and 90-year-old farmers in Iowa have, maybe multiple 200-inch bucks in their barn skull capped that are just piled up.
Totally.
If I had to guess, if I had to draw a graph of like big deer on the landscape in the Midwest and the Northeast, because I'm, that's where humans have had probably the most presence as opposed to Alberta and Western Kansas, stuff like that. I would say trophy hunting, or I'm sorry, what would you call it early on?
Just sustenance hunting.
Sustenance, commodity hunting. Like when we basically hunted a lot of them out. Like the deer herds were very limited. There was probably, so I would say, if you're going to call it Native American time.
Oh, so you're talking like market hunting.
I would say pre-European, a lot of big bucks.
Yep.
A lot of just dinosaurs walking around.
Probably.
And then market hunting probably damn near crashed the system.
Yeah, I mean, it almost
across the board brought us down to very, very few. And then you have things like the Boone and Crockett Club, the like the Teddy Roosevelt deals, and the things that we were talking about that gave trophy value back to the whitetail species, I think is what led the effort for repopulation and for and then I think it kind of grew and grew and grew until what we know is the peak of like the industry, which would be like the 80s, 90s almost into the 2000s. I think you're going to see a bubble of big bucks, and then I think because of technology now, we've been on a steady decline ever since.
Of big bucks.
And I would hope that if we can bring ourselves to limit technology. And like, because now we have more control over that probably than any of those peaks prior. We literally can manage to the highest degree that we want to do. It's a decision at this point. It's not just they made it or they didn't.
Right.
We have a choice at this point to limit our effectiveness as hunters to produce the level of age and that we want.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily know if we are killing less big bucks than we were. Or if there are less big bucks.
I'm not saying killing less. I'm saying, do they exist?
I think they probably exist more because of privatization and management, mainly privatization of land.
Then when?
Than the 90s and stuff, 80s and 90s. Yeah.
Because of management.
And privatization of land for recreational value.
Maybe.
Maybe the Boone and Crockett or Pope and Young records don't.
Right. We don't have a good gauge for it, right?
But yeah, because people just don't care as much anymore about that.
Right.
But I mean, surely seems like it. I mean, per what we just talked about earlier, like I'm in the 900 club and I'm a nobody. Well, in the 90s, like the 900 club was a big deal. Right. So it would seem like there's just more 150-inch plus deer now than there were then.
So it's tough because like maybe these aren't the only two considerations, but back then people cared about book entries more than they do now, I would say. Just across the general public. But we have way more technology and are way more effective as hunters now than we were back then.
Agree.
So those two kind of like contrast each other in a pretty harsh way.
Yeah, because there's no way to measure it.
Right.
And then there's the swing in nature too. Like Montana, we've got like the Petrie buck and a handful of the big famous typicals. Almost every one of the famous deer from Montana is like 95 or earlier. And then in 1996, we had like a historical bad winter that supposedly killed about 60% of the deer population. I don't care who you are out there. You see a 150, it's game time. Yeah. And
it's tough. Like the herd just never recovered really.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a lot of places now. I feel like we're falling off of the management thing a little. It seems like to me, like, It was peaking a little bit ago. Like not that it was good or bad, but like the QDMA era, like 5, 6, 7 years ago, like people I say were peaking. The general hunting public was very interested in management. Anybody that could participate in that.
Food plots and passing deer and killing does.
Yep, and I think that people have become frustrated, like in the past few years, mainly because of state regulations and advancements in technology that have not been kept up with regulation, that they're willing to compromise. You know what I mean? I think guys now definitely like there are still guys with standards, still guys absolutely that's happening. But I see more of an attitude of just like, well, you know, I'm happy just to see a shoot a 3 or 4 year old.
Well, and I think the age of information we talk about them, there's no one person in charge of quality assurance, right, of the information that's going out. You know, 10, 15 years ago when, you know, QDMA was a big thing, it was like, you know, there were a handful of magazines and organizations, and it was like, you know, I got to shoot a bunch of does to keep my buck to doe ratio. I'm going to plant food plots. I'm going to do TSI. Now you look at it, and there's guys that are, you know, saying I'm not shooting any more does. Like they're, you know, I want the bucks here.
Nobody knows on the doe thing,
right? So you know, and then you've got people that are like, yeah, you know, I'm going to plant food plots, but if I'm in Ohio or Kentucky or Kansas, or even Iowa, like I'm going to feed and or bait. You know, and so there's just all of these things now that it's like, if what was like the only source of information, and so it's kind of, you know, you took what was given to you has now blossomed into, I mean, too much information. Like you don't,
right.
You know, everybody's doing something different essentially. And so that along, I think with those kind of liberalized regulations that are coming up from an opportunity side from the States, it's like, it's kind of the Wild West, you know, if you look at, I think from like when we were in that 80s and 90s sustenance period, you know, most guys, if it was like in Pennsylvania, like we had a 2-week buck season. First legal buck they saw dead. I mean, I would say there were very few guys passing any deer at that point. Very few guys. Right. And then there was a doe season. You smacked as many does as you could. Even when it became concurrent, like most guys were just, you know, stacking up and stacking the freezer.
Let's real quick comparison between, because like Pennsylvania has a very different like path than I would imagine some Midwestern states. So like, that what you're describing there is like that's what we relate to in Pennsylvania, where it's like our dads and uncles shot any. There wasn't even an antler restriction, so there was no such thing as a legal deer. But they were shooting.
Had to be a 3-inch spike.
They were trying to shoot like an antlered buck.
Yep.
You know, and some of them with their bow. That would have been like in the 80s.
80s and 90s. Yeah.
And so I would say there were not a lot of big bucks here at that time.
Probably not.
But in some of the Midwestern states, like I don't know their history as well, but like I would look at like the Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, and I would say in the 80s, there 90s probably were, right? There probably were some giant, like monsters.
There's still a lot of guys, like a lot of your gun hunters were still sustenance hunting, but the bow hunting pressure was low, and non-resident hunting, like in Kansas, didn't even exist.
Right.
Like you couldn't even hunt
there.
no
non-resident.
There was no non-resident hunting. So I think a lot of that is the advent of pressure in media getting people to those states. Like even when North American Whitetail was coming out or coming to your door, like, you know, as a 18-year-old Pennsylvania guy, I wasn't booking trips to Iowa and Illinois to go hunt. Like it was just foreign to me. I didn't even know how to get to Ohio, let alone, you know, out there.
West.
Yeah. So now it's like, you know, everybody's doing it.
Yeah.
Everybody's flocking to those states because, you know, you're in Pennsylvania or Michigan or New York or West, whatever. And it's like, yeah, I'm going to go out to the Midwest and I'm going to kill big deer. Yeah. So I think the pressure and the amount of hunting pressure in those areas has just exploded, which is probably why like a lot of the locals are like, yeah, it's not like the heyday.
Yeah.
It just reminded me, this is kind of off topic, but talking about are there as many or are there not? There is a group, there's 2 brothers up there in Alberta in the area we were at, and I'll find the information on them for you guys, but they have killed, I believe to date, between the 2 of them, they've killed 15 over 200.
Holy
and they've got,
smokes.
and this is public record, and I think the collection's even been on display up there at local shows and stuff, but we were talking about it when we were up there, and that has to be the most.
Yeah,
that's got to be. And so I was really hoping when we were up there we'd get a chance to go see them, but.
Is there an official, like, belt? Like a title, like you know, because we can run down the list of like Adam Hayes, Josh Bomar.
Yeah, Bomar's killed what, 6?
I think something like
6.
that.
I think
That's
Adam's
crazy.
killed 4 or 5.
Spook Spans killed several.
Yeah. Stan Potts
has killed several.
Yep.
Who am I missing? Low fence, 200 plus inch, you know, gross deer.
And the list gets small real quick after you name the few. I mean, dude,
Winky killed one.
Yeah, Winky killed one.
Killed the one.
Waddy's killed 1, I think.
Has he?
Yeah, killed 215.
Did he? I thought it was a 190 something.
Was it?
Yeah. You're talking about the Kansas buck. Oh, yeah. Rising's killed one. Well, one.
Yeah.
1.
There's a couple brothers in Ohio. The name's skipping me. They're crossbow guys from Columbus, but they've killed a couple, I think.
I would imagine Skip's killed a couple, 1 or 2.
Yeah.
I know.
And again, are we talking net 200s? Because if we get into net 200s, that list goes way
you
down.
whittle it down. You whittle it down.
Yeah. So, I mean, there aren't many, right? So that's kind of where it's like.
And those are the notable guys. I mean, I'm sure there's guys that aren't,
That's, I mean, to me, even though we kind of said the 170, like the new 900 club is the 200 club.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of because you've how are you?
Well, you gotta have classes because
you've got to boil it down to like a couple handfuls of guys. If you're going to mention them in an article, you can't be like, okay, well, it's the top $6 over one. There's a lot of people that are killing those kind of deer.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of people. Mm-hmm. So you've kind of now you got to keep going up. Eventually, you get to like it's who's killing 200.
It would be fun. It would be fun. Like it's not a competition by any means, but it would be fun to just be like, all right, if you broke it down and said, here's a class of, anybody that's killed over 3 200 inchers gross. I'm just curious what that number is.
It's not many.
It's not big.
Is it more than 10?
Yeah, I bet.
Okay.
I bet it's like 20 to 30 would be my guess.
So I don't think you increase the number. I think you apply whatever you're going to do there. Apply deductions. Okay. How many guys have killed over 3
net 200s?
Gross. Yeah, net 200s.
Not many. A very, very small amount.
Okay.
Very few.
Yeah, like 2 handfuls maybe.
So then probably back the number down maybe. How many guys have killed
net
180 or 190 net?
Probably goes back up to 30 or 40. Yeah.
Yeah. The
hard part now
the
is
judge in me wants to see like 5 to 10 people on the stage.
The hard
the
hard part now is like, when your dad and those guys were out there chasing those big deer and killing those big deer, they were doing it just by like grassroots efforts, talking to neighbors and stuff. And like now, dude, if you've got money, you could go buy 200s all day long.
Right.
How many 200s has your dad killed?
None.
None.
Nope.
Really? Some of those Canada bucks that we were looking at, none of those are 200 inches.
There's a whole bunch in the high 180s, 190s, and he hunted deer that were bigger. Like I told you, that shed we found was, he saw that buck and he was convinced he was every bit of mid 250s, low 260s on the hook. And he, series of like close calls and stuff, but never could close the deal on him. But then again,
do you think that eats at him at all?
I think so. But at the same time,
he's got time a little bit, right? He's got some time left.
Yeah, he does. I mean, if I can get him to hunt, now he's all artwork these days.
Yeah, yeah.
Still very whitetail oriented, but he's real happy to be in his studio up in Montana. And
I don't blame him.
Yeah,
how old is your dad now?
I think here in November he'll be 78.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
well, and I mean, he's kind of lived through, some of the most amazing times in whitetail history. And you're in a time now where a lot of guys are like, they're kind of, it's got a bad taste in their mouth.
Right.
Like, I mean, we all love deer hunting and we love everything about it, but the way it is now is kind of leaving a bad taste in everybody's mouth, of like,
Who is? Why? What do you mean?
Just whitetail.
Who's got a bad taste?
I kind of do.
About what?
Just how hunting as a society is for deer hunting right now.
Oh, sure. Yeah, well, there's parts of it, that have become, well, what would you say? Like, I don't know, bogged down by social media, conflict amongst hunters.
Yep. Technology, money buys the deer at this point,
and big money industries is going to bring,
money.
Like earlier when we were talking about the Cabela boys and
Johnny
Morris and my dad and guys like Gordon Whittington and David Morris. And
it's the handful.
Yeah, but they did it for the love of the game.
Exactly.
There was they didn't go out in the woods. They weren't documenting every single thing they're doing. And they would do amazing things and no one would ever know until they told the story 20 years later, but not only that, there just wasn't the monetary incentive. So you had to love it.
Yeah.
And the hard scouting and really, one of those deer that my dad killed that was on the cover of North American Whitetail that's really recognizable because he's really bladed, like high and tight, but just real heavy bladed buck. It was, I think, 46 below the day that he killed that deer.
Holy cow.
And he told me that he had taken his glove off just to like when he had a bead on the deer, and he had to wait like 20 minutes trying to get his hand functional enough to like once he knew he got the deer, he said he had to like recover a little bit just to even, but they spent the whole day out in that stuff. And that deer too weighed 350 or 342 pounds. So like, and the big bodied, like doing those cold winters up there. Yeah. And, but it was just different. And everything was scouted. They're, shed hunting in the spring. They're finding everything, but they didn't have one picture. They had to spend serious time in the woods scouting and making presumptions based off of tracks and rub lines and,
There's something cool
Freaking love that.
too, just about people not knowing it. Like, certainly we love to like watch, people documenting their experiences in the field and stuff, but like there's something like way more badass about just the fact that they just did it and it was awesome and nobody knew about it until, like you said, 20 years ago, 20 years later, they're like, oh yeah, here's, here was the story. Here was the, we snapped a picture or something at the end of it, but.
Well, and you think about the time and effort of field to like, connect the dots to say, all right, I'm going to spend some time and I'm going to hunt this deer. I have no idea what it is necessarily, but like, I think there's a really big one up here, and then once you see it, you're hooked, right? Now it's like, okay, like that's the one, we got to make this happen. Right. And now I'd say, there for sure are, we probably over exaggerate, but there aren't many big deer that aren't known in the U.S. anymore. For sure. Especially in the populated areas. Like maybe you get into some of the rural Kansas and even out west or Dakotas or whatever. But for the most part, and like, most of the Midwest, Northeast, and South, like if there's a big deer, somebody knows about it.
For sure.
It's probably on camera.
There are areas, I think, like some of the ones that we mentioned, and maybe, it's easy to sit here in this podcast studio in Pennsylvania and be like, imagining a woodblock, and there's like, guys are hunting all four sides of it. And that definitely happens. We've experienced that time and time again. But I do still think that there are areas of vast wilderness and just landscape that like
Canada is one of them.
There's just no way to possibly cover it all. And some areas in the States too. Some of those states that you mentioned. I think there are some tracks in Kansas, some tracks in Texas, some tracks in probably even the Midwest, like some different parts of Iowa and stuff that just like,
rare,
they're
but
just still
they're
big
there.
landowners. Yeah, they just can't possibly get covered, or there's,
Well, what's so interesting, I think, now is like you look at, say Iowa and Illinois,
the
Missouri.
big woods of Pennsylvania, frankly.
Well,
dude.
that's what I was going to say is like those areas for sure, if you talk to the locals, the heyday's gone. Right. And like people are killing big deer. There's 200 inchers walking around in all of those states, but like it's not like it used to be. You flip that script to Pennsylvania and we're killing bigger deer than we've ever killed. This year there are probably multiple 200s walking around this state. They'll probably kill, 2 handfuls plus of booners in this. We never did that. 94% of our buck kills were a 1.5-year-old buck, every year.
Right.
That's how it was historically.
Yeah. And we've in the past speculated as to why that is. Certainly the antler restrictions started people on a course of like, hey, we can grow.
You have to pass.
So there's a mindset of like, okay, well maybe let's see what they get like the next year.
Right.
That didn't hurt. Unfortunately, probably a large part of it is due to privatization of land
and loss of hunters.
Yeah,
so
we had
a million deer hunters at one point. We're 750 now. So you lose 250,000 guys out in the woods. It's a lot of pressure off.
Yeah. And I don't know. I would be interested to know the ratio of big deer like over a certain age or antler class that are on public, like national forest, versus on privatized properties.
And there's more and more definitely happen in the national forest because as the hunters aged, as populations in these suburban areas grew, guys just didn't go to the big woods anymore. They're like, I've got bigger deer or more deer at home. I'll just hunt here. Right. So like all that camp tradition in the North Woods really faded. Well, with that did all the pressure. And so these deer had just vast areas and, they always had the antler potential, right? And even the nutrition it's not great, but it was okay. They just never had the age. Well, now they're getting 5. We talked to guys that are saying, some of these deer are 7, 8, 9 years old. Throw the biggest antlers that they can possibly throw, with the nutrition limitation that they have. So
you're talking 140s, 150s.
Yeah, probably. But there
I do think a lot of the bigger deer in the state come from this area, like from.
I think they come
southwestern Pennsylvania.
I think they come from over towards Lancaster, like in farm country.
South Central.
Yep, just better soils and better farmland. Mm-hmm. We don't have that over here. Our soils are shit. Mm-hmm. They have that's why they're selling at $15,000, $20,000 an acre. It's more productive farmland, better wherever the better soils are. As long as the deer can get age, is where the better deer are. Mm-hmm. But other than that, it just kind of ran. I was texting with a guy today. He's hooking us up with the guys up north that are killing those those booners with trad bows in the national forest.
Who's hooking us up?
Just a guy watching a podcast gave me the contact for it's two brothers up there.
Okay.
And
you're talking to kill the booner last year?
Yeah, with the trad bow.
That's what we're talking about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. And so those guys are, and it sounds like they're on big deer again this year. So they're up there.
Oh yeah.
It's just,
well, dude, guys that are on big deer are on big deer, not like year after year. You know what I mean? It's like you dedicate enough time to figuring out where they're at, and it's like that's one aspect of hunting that's like it never really ends in a good way. It's like you're constantly building. Maybe storyline is not the word for it, but it's like I know right now of like 2-year-olds that I'm like I'm not really paying attention to, but I know they're there.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that 2, 3, 4 years from now, are those. And so you want to be constantly cataloging and taking account for, the deer that are there and what could be. And there's, you can't put too much stock in them because chances are they'll die or they won't be there or whatever. But every once in a while, a few will make a few, and the more attention you will have paid and or track their progress, found sheds, things like that, encounters, the more, the more satisfaction probably you get out from finally catching up with them.
I think that's where those remote areas, like you and your dad hunting or shed hunting in those, Canadian areas where, I mean, you if you have the opportunity to watch deer for 3-4 years, right? Like that's where you really can understand all right, this deer's got potential, and thinking ahead in 2 or 3 years, he's going to be a giant. Most guys are in areas that are so pressured. It's I mean, he may not make it out of this year.
Yeah.
Right.
So those are kind of, and honestly, that's kind of where I like the big woods. Even some of my properties, it's been more and more surprising of how many deer are just making it through. And I'm like, man, I can't believe these deer aren't dead, or they disappear for a year and they come back the next.
It's an encouraging thing.
Yeah.
To see a deer from year to year, you're like, wow, he made it.
Yeah.
Cool.
And it's weird. Cause you would think I can't believe he didn't die. Right. You just assume that's
it's
what
one
happens.
of the more intriguing things about them. They're like, where is he going? How's he surviving? How's he getting this far?
Yeah, because the pressure, and you might be one of them after him. And it's how is this deer just making it through? And again, you kind of think to the basics, he's just got to reproduce and survive. That's it. Mm-hmm. So that's his only goals every year.
Right.
Reproduce and survive. So it's, they figure it out. And sure, there's a lot of deer that you're like, man, that deer, that 3-year-old I sent you in Ohio, next year that deer will be all over 60s probably if he makes it. But it's I wouldn't blame somebody for shooting him this year because he's going to look huge coming through the woods.
Sure. Yep.
But it's hard to believe. But I think, kind of hearing those things of how your dad and that group really kind of went after things and got after those sheds and built those storylines, man, I miss that stuff.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I'm envious of now. And, I say that because I've killed big bucks. I've had those experiences. There was a time in my life where all I wanted to do was find the biggest buck possible and kill him. That's all I cared about. I've come back to now missing the mystique of the woods. I mean, we talked about it on our last podcast. I'm not using cell cams this year. I'm only using regular cams. Just, I'll still monitor things. I'll still check cams, but the surprise of checking a card and flipping through pictures and be like, whoa, what, that's a stud. Or just even if I don't get to check the card and I'm out hunting and here comes a deer that, I'm kind of shocks you.
Right.
That has been missing for, since cell cams have really come into play during the season. They're still an amazing tool, and I use them for scouting. I use them for trespassing monitoring. But yeah, it's just during the season, it's there haven't been many places that Jared and I have hunted that it's not we know every deer.
Yeah, it's just different.
Yeah, we know as soon as he steps out, we're like, that's that deer. Yeah. We know it. And that's, there's a cool factor in that. But there's also a really cool factor to the mystique of what's out there.
Yeah.
And
look, I'm also pretty fanatic about the romance of the West out there, the frontier kind of. And I mean, for most of my life, for those same reasons, what really calls to you there, as a resident in Montana, I would go out and buy, deer, elk. I'd get my bear tag, turkey. I'd get a mountain lion, antelope. But I'd go to certain areas where it's you go out also knowing that all this stuff is out there. But I certainly wasn't patterning deer, and it's big mountain country. I'm from, my hometown's only 40 miles south of the BC border. So it's it's big. It's the Canadian Rockies.
You're in the
much.
Canadian Rockies, yeah.
And so it's tough country, it's hard country, and there's grizzly bears, and we have a lot of wolves now, especially. And I think now in Montana you can get 5 per resident. You can get 5 wolf tags and
Wow.
over the counter. And so I mean, you have that lineup too. You want to talk about kind of the mystique. I mean, you get out there.
You never know what you're going to get into.
Right. And then you add in like the last elk I got was in some of the worst grizzly country up there. So you have this whole dynamic of getting him out of the back country. And we were like 6 miles from the truck. I killed him right at dark. So we still had to quarter him and everything, and buried, it was high elevation. There's no trees up there, but we buried the meat in a snowbank that we couldn't take on the first trip out. And when we came back, my buddy had killed a cow like the day before up there, and a grizzly had already buried it, and it was in the same drainage like below us, so we knew that bear was there. And so coming back in for the second trip, we came in on like adjacent mountain and glassed that area for about a half an hour first, and then when we decided we don't think he's on it yet, we just hightailed it down there, packed up the rest of the meat, and then had 6 miles to go back out off trail. And this area happens to be also where, like in Montana, they have the live trap where they'll relocate bears. This is one of the areas where
they're just stacking them.
Yeah, because it butts up against the Bob Marshall Wilderness there, which is a giant wilderness area, and their hopes are that they'll push off into the Bob and not come back to town,
right,
or be too close to people for whatever problems they were causing. So that's just, I don't know. I love that wild dynamic. If you would have asked me, not in a public sense, like what would you consider yourself, I'd go closer to like mountain man than just hardcore hunter. Yeah. And I love spending the time in the high country and the adventures and everything that come with it. You know, getting a big whitetail is great. But we're not quite as deer centered out there, which is,
sure,
you know, a lot of people will probably be surprised to hear me say that, but like the reason that I don't have, you know, a pile of 180s and stuff like that, not saying if I just wanted to, I could go out and get it.
Sure.
Not making that statement.
Yeah.
But the reason I don't have more big deer is, you know, I've hunted in Alaska and all Montana is where I grew up, and you know, over the years I have been to Africa a few times and done that whole thing. But the diversity of that is stuck with me. So I love big whitetails, but I also one day want to get that 380 bull.
Well, it's tough. I mean, because, you know, it's kind of like, you know, even at the whitetail game, you know, if you want to be a serious whitetail hunter, and people get mad at this, it's like you can't be a duck hunter as well. Like you know,
right.
If you want to be a serious whitetail hunter, like you probably could elk hunt, but I mean, it's still going to be, I mean, September is leading up to it, right? I mean, the moment October 1 kicks in, you better be in whitetail country.
Yeah, you got to be focused. I mean, if you're going to be as effective as possible, you got to be focused.
Yeah, so it's super tough, you know, and I mean that's the sacrifice that you have is when you really marry yourself to one of those things. You're kind of in it, you know. For us, like the tease is like mule deer, right? But it's early season mule deer, and the moment early season muleys are done, like we're out and we're in whitetail country. Yeah. You know, and so you have those opportunities to cross over and dabble into stuff. But yeah, I think everybody kind of finds their marriage to that stuff. Like I love going in the big woods of whitetail stuff, where Jared's more in the ag countryside. But I bet if you put me in the high country, I'd like it, but I'd feel completely fish out of water.
Right.
You know, like what am I doing here? You know.
Well, you gotta like to, you know. How can you really know what you like or what you're most passionate about if you don't try some other things?
Exactly.
I think it's probably the mentality. So like it's good to like, you know, it's good to be focused, but it's also good to like try some things, you know, and like so I did 2 elk hunts and I've done a mule deer hunt, and I've duck hunted, I've turkey hunted, and so like with those experiences, like I'm like, how do I, you know, I introspectively I'm like, okay, how did I feel about these? Even like a gun hunt versus a bow hunt, you know what I mean? All these different aspects. I'm like, what did I get the most enjoyment out of? And then I think not that I've tried it all. I have not been on a moose hunt. I've not been on a sheep hunt. I've not been on these other things. But of the things that I have tried, I'm like, okay, here are the things that I really enjoyed. And now how do I get as much of this out of a season as possible?
Right.
While remaining open-minded or open to opportunities, like if they came up. Like if you said, hey, Dad wants to take you on a moose hunt or whatever, I'm like, let's figure out how to, like, that's not an experience that I've had yet. I think I want to try that.
Yeah. And there's ones that wouldn't show as well on camera. Like my favorite one, I absolutely love fall bear hunting out in Montana. I don't sit around much and watch it on film.
Yeah.
It's just not, I mean, it's not something that I'm going to cut to and be like, oh, I'm going to sit and watch this for an hour. But like it is fun, and you get in crazy country. It's an adrenaline rush.
A lot of big glassing and stuff. Yeah.
But like, I mean, then there's the retrieval aspect. You know, you get one down, you got to go in there and get them.
Yeah.
And there's always that possibility. And about 5 years ago, and I actually told this story on a podcast about a year ago, but I got rolled by a bear that I shot up there who was down, and I ended up having to approach him on the downhill side, which you don't do, but he got out on this big rock slide, and he was cliffed out above him, so there's no way for me to get. And I got to within about 30 yards and noticed that he was still twitching, and I took another shot, and he stood up and came right downhill. I shot him a third time at about 15 yards, and I bolted and shot him a fourth time, barrel to chest, and he trucked me, knocked my hat off, knocked my gun off, and I was standing out on the rock slide, and I was on a kind of vehicle-sized boulder. So, like, I'm fortunate that I didn't fall off the rock, too. But he hit me hard, and I fell on my back, and he rolled over the top and fell off the back of the rock.
Holy shit.
And died right below me.
Whoa.
So, and I thought, and actually, when we actually quartered him and, you know, skinned him out and everything, the first shot was a great shot.
Yeah, it
was a hard shot.
Tough. Animals just got to survive and breed.
And tough as nails. But how do you relay something like that to... You might get on one of those one time if you haven't already like shot a bear, and you might be addicted from you know the moose. I shot a 70-inch bull up in central Alaska years ago, and beautiful animal, beautiful country, but it wasn't like an overly challenging hunt.
Yeah.
I you know, again, made a good shot, and the 3 days packing him out was most of the experience.
Yeah. But locating a lot of river looking call type stuff.
And fortunately in this area, my dad and I got dropped off by bush plane in the middle of nowhere in central Alaska, and we camped, and I had a bear tag and a moose tag, and moose didn't open till the next day. So I actually killed a bear the day before, and we got him back to camp, and we sat on the same ridge, and within like 5 miles, we found 3 bulls. And so we actually knew where we were going the next morning. And I picked between a wider one and a more palmated one. There was one that was way more palmed, but he was probably 5.5, 6 miles away. And the one I shot was about 3, but he had moved a little further away. But I mean, we basically got up the next morning and hiked down there, watched him for about an hour, and then decided to take him.
Yeah.
It was crazy. He was 7'1" at the shoulder.
Holy cow. That's a monster.
Those big Yukon
animal.
moose are just, but you know, and then, like I said, it was like, hoorah, we got one. And then it's like, now we got to get him back.
Yeah.
And so, you know.
Yeah, and you're in bear country there.
Big time, yeah. Yeah, and we saw bears on and off that area. Thankfully, nothing got on the meat. Because, again, it was just alders and stuff. There was nothing we could do to keep them off of it if one found it. But and we're beating feet. But, again, at 3.5 miles, it's like you can only...
Yeah, I can only do so much.
Yeah, so I think we were in it like 3 or 4 big trips and resting back at camp a little bit and then going back and doing it. And I kept finding these big paddles along the way. My dad was getting all pissed off at me. Like,
just sheds all
stop
over the
picking
place.
those up. We don't.
You just carried more weight.
By the end of it, I had a separate trip back there to go get this pile of moose paddles that I just can't. The shed hunter in me, I can't leave them.
HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Pure Wildlife Blends.
Yeah, buddy. We're doing a lot of food plots this year. It seems like the planning, the preparation, like the coordinating for getting everything, you know, in the ground is like it just never ends.
Yeah, and I just got off an 18-hour bender where I'm on multiple farms getting everything ready. But this year, fortunately, we've got Pure Wildlife Blends, which is Jeff Sturgis. Who better to partner with for our food plot program than a guy who's got 30 years of experience, been on thousands of farms. I mean, the guy lives and breathes food plots.
Yeah, and so the blends themselves are all handpicked by Jeff, and it's like, man, we've had a lot of conversations with him over the years, and he's been pretty influential on how we set up farms and stuff. And frankly, you know, the product, it's in the name, it's Pure Wildlife Blend. So a lot of these other seeds that you see that are blue and orange and all these things, it's because they're coated with lime and they're dyed, and it's marketing at the end of the day. So we have a lot of confidence in the seeds that Jeff has chose, and that's what we're going to be planting this year. And so right now, you can use code HUNTR10 for 10% off anything on the website.
So if you're looking for switch, clover, brassica, or Jeff's favorite, layer in the rye.
Layer in the rye.
Yep, check out purewildlifeblends.com. I think that sense of adventure is kind of really cool. I mean, it's definitely the one thing that probably lacks for most whitetail hunters. You know, it's that, you know, most guys are, you know, to the stand, you know, at whatever, 2 o'clock and out at dark. And like,
Right.
Well, you can find it though. I mean, that's where the non-out-of-state thing, you know,
Sure.
comes in. I feel like I get my fair share of adventure whitetail hunting every year. You know what I mean? Just even
yeah, you have to look for it.
out to the Midwest and the you know, going back to North Dakota this year, I think that's a big component of that's an adventure.
Yeah.
Granted, it's the second year that I've done it, but it's still an adventure.
That's an adventure. Yeah, but that's different. Like even when we go to like our farm in Illinois, it's like park at the house, walk in.
It was an adventure the first few times. I mean, driving out there and like it was an adventure, and it still is. Like we're on the tail end of like figuring it out. And at a certain point, yeah, it becomes you know, there's smaller adventures with the deer that are on that, you know, smaller experiences and stuff. And then yeah, who knows? Eventually, you know, ideally you don't have to lose one to gain another one, but you know,
yeah, you look for the next.
You look for the next adventure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's where your expectations always check out. Like we go to the national forest here and hunt, and it's a grind. It's an adventure, and it's, you know, you're beating your feet up just trying to get into areas and don't see shit, and then you're heading out at dark, you know,
Right.
and but your expectations aren't like I'm going in there to kill a booner, right? I mean that's just not. It's, you know, it's
well,
different.
and they can offset each other. I mean, I'm not going to North Dakota with the expectation to kill a booner. But I'm just as excited about it as I would be to hunt our farm where a booner is possible.
Yeah.
You know, because of the adventure element
challenge
and who we're doing
factor.
it with. And yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Dude, there's adventure out there. I mean, if you want it, you just got to just make it happen. Adventure doesn't just happen in our everyday life.
I think that's where
you need to say, I
Yeah.
want to go on an adventure.
I mean, if you
and then
talk to
book it.
most whitetail guys, I mean, they've never hunted outside their state. You know, they may have hunted the same farm for their entire life. You know, it's like, it's right out the back door or whatever. And not that there's not a, you know, a sense of, you know, freedom and rush when you're out there hunting, but like, yeah,
Dude,
it's different.
adventure is just as like a concept is like almost lost on our on our generation. Like how many people and how frequently even in our life do you get to experience adventure, like wilderness adventure?
I mean, people are deathly afraid of it.
Yeah, well, maybe.
I mean, maybe not in the hunting community, but I mean, if you think of society of like alpha males, like almost non-existent anymore.
I have to agree. It's, you know, especially when I first moved out of Montana to Tennessee, it was pretty shocking. I met some outdoorsmen and stuff there, but the description of what they're doing, like the first day I was there, I had a friend invite me to go fishing, and I said, okay, I'll go fishing. And I'm like, all right, where are we going? And it's like, oh, it's this pond I sneak into on the back of this golf course. And I'm like, A, I don't feel like trespassing, and B,
He's like, got your bobbers?
yeah, you know, but you just want to go sit there and drink beer and sit
Yeah.
on the edge of the pond, and it's a different perception. I do think in some ways what you're describing, the people not getting out of their own state, that is the only place I think all of us could be mindful of. Like, it's easy to look online and say, oh, that's BS. That guy's getting to kill. He's just hunting bigger deer. If I lived in that area, I would.
Sure.
You kind of have to keep the perception, like, just because it's the only way that maybe someone's seen it most of their life, or it's the way that their dad told them that this is how it is. I've tried to be wary of that because we were talking about yesterday, the Midwest is a completely different game than Montana. It's different up here. You know, it's different than Canada. It's not like a one size fits all whitetail and everybody should be, you know, some areas, you pull on a 120 all day long.
Yeah.
You know, if you're in northern Alberta, you don't.
Yeah, you don't.
You know, and that doesn't make the person that there's some young guys I know up there in Saskatchewan that they shed hunt every spring and they hunt, and I'm so jealous of like what they're exposed to all the time. And I was giving them a hard time, and one of them finally said, well, then move up here.
Yeah.
You know, if it's that big of a deal, otherwise, you know, shut up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
we hear that all the time, like,
Yeah.
especially the Iowa stuff. Like for, you know, if you want to hunt Iowa every year, you pretty much have to be a resident, right? And if you want it bad enough, move out here. You know, in the same breath, sometimes I feel bad for them in that, like, you know, once you're there, like, there's not really anywhere else you're going to deer hunt in the U.S. Like, why would you leave Iowa to come hunt Pennsylvania or something? I mean, there are some guys, like our buddy Rendell's going to do it, and he's going to come hunt, and it, you know, it's an adventure seeking. It's not for quality of deer experience necessarily. But yeah, most of those guys would be wide open with it of like, yeah, there's, maybe it's Kansas, but there aren't many.
Well, dude, I feel super privileged as just a hunter in general to get to experience even the most basic level of adventure. Like for a lot of people, walking out into a deer stand, like into the actual woods, is as much adventure as they'll see like in a given year. It's like, they're in an office or they're, whatever, back and forth to school with their kids, whatever they're doing. Like maybe they go to the Outer Banks for vacation or something. It's just, whoa. But like,
well, you're crabbing.
Yeah, walking to the beach at night, seeing little ghost crabs. But dude, I'm scheming for like, and I love that aspect of it. Just even to be, like in 2 weeks, I'll be on the Missouri River. I mean, going down in the dark, into getting the back. And I'm just thinking like, dude, not that I'm doing anything that I think is crazy, like for my limits and stuff. I'm like, this is doable. I'm prepared for this. I'm with, people that were prepared for the adventure. But that concept to a lot of people is just like, how could you possibly, how are you doing like that, and it's just like, you just have to,
well, and that information
set off an adventure, be open to it.
So relevant right now because it's everywhere. Like it's everywhere to figure that out. 30 years ago, like I said, I had no idea how to get from Pennsylvania to Ohio to hunt. It just was foreign. Like I couldn't just go online and figure it out.
Bust out the big Atlas.
The Atlas, and then you might call in the Ohio DNR. Well, like, how do I buy a license there? Like, it was completely foreign. Like at one point in time, I think it was like 95% of hunters only hunt within their state boundaries. They'll never leave.
In a lot of ways, though, I think the adventure has diminished because of like technology, like
absolutely
mapping software, just communication, whatever, outfitters, just people establishing the ability is the more you have the ability and the tools and stuff, like the less risk, the less adventure there is. So like back then it would have been a big adventure to go to Ohio and hunt public land. You'd be like,
absolutely,
we're gonna call the state offices, we're gonna like
I'm gonna flip my atlas, get these maps. The national forest, I've got topo maps and stuff. Like I'm breaking all of this.
There was a lot of adventure element to that, whereas now it's like, dude, that's the closest place that I hunt. I'm just like, jump in the truck, I have my things together, and I go and I do it.
Yep.
And so maybe you have to go a little bit further or go, seek it a little bit more nowadays.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely is. I think for a lot of people, because I grew up hunting the 90s. I mean, my first year of hunting was 94, 96. And so, for even when I started going with my dad in like 92 or 3, like all it was woodsmanship.
Right.
Like you were out there reading sign, you were out there glassing, you were just, you just put miles on, you just learned and sucked it in. Right. And like a lot of those skills, like in the last 5 to 6 years, especially, are like, you don't really need them. Like they come in handy for sure. But like if you are maximizing the technology that's available to you and legal to use, you don't really need them.
You need less. Like there's I mean, you could say, like in bait states, you can go without. You could, if you can bring them to a specific
corn pile
location.
camera, they're there.
Yeah, you can get away with that. But like outside of that situation, just back it down and be like, okay, what's the next best thing? You're like, well, I can put a scraper or water hole. And that's newish, information that people have. So it's like, you can do the same thing. Like you can go out and put a scrape in and hunt over it. And you have to have a little bit more what's, okay, they're not going to be there all year long or in every condition. So, okay, what do I need to do here? And that's not illegal anywhere. So those, so those are definitely tactics. I don't know, man. I hate to dumb it down too much because like you still need, like, you can't just walk out there and kill one. Like maybe you and I are guilty sometimes of making it sound too easy. And it certainly is easier than it has been
in some places, in some situations,
because of tools, technology, information. But it's still hard.
Well, if you want a specific quality of deer, it's hard.
Yeah, the further you go up that scale, it starts.
I mean, not to devalue them, but like it's like if I just want to go out and kill a buck, pretty damn doable.
Well, you know what though, we take for granted what we know too. I think it would be easy for us we could go out and kill a buck. It's easy to say that, but
so maybe
it takes you a few sits or something to do that.
Very doable though.
But for people who don't do it, talk about it, obsess about it every day, like there's just a different level of outlook on it. I mean, dude, like we definitely take for granted the things that we can look at and read. The lens that we're seeing things through, that doesn't come overnight.
Sure.
Like, and that's what you see. Like, look at your kids. You're like, my kids are idiots when they look at right. Or I look at Corey and I'm like, he's come a long way, but like he's not seeing what I'm seeing. And so I don't know. I need to. Yeah, we'll have a little more grace for those people, I guess, or just not take for granted what we know.
I think it makes sense. It's just, when we talk about like Cody's dad's era of like those dudes were freaking hunters.
Yeah,
I mean those guys from a woodsmanship side to getting on deer,
but also I doubt that they knew what we know as far as like
from a deer behavior and stuff. Yeah, probably not. Just because they didn't observe them as much and see them as much.
They didn't have the observation tools. They didn't have trail cameras, basically.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I mean, the sheer amount of like, at least in what we have in the digital era too, of what we can just see.
Yep.
That's different. I mean, they're making presumptions back then on like, okay, I saw that deer come out of the timber at first light and he was only in the field for 10 minutes and out, and then the next year we're not seeing him at all, but we're seeing tracks in the same area, so he's just coming out in the dark. I mean, you're like,
those were all the assumptions that were being made.
Like, for instance, do you think that your dad knew back in the day, like, about scrape behavior? Like, do you think they understood? Like, they didn't have trail cameras to monitor them, so all they could see was, like, the evidence. Do you think they knew about, like, snort wheezing, like, or, like, did they have grunt tubes in the 80s?
Oh, yeah. There was a Dick Idol rattling and calling kit back then. That
there was.
had a grunt call in it.
In the 80s?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you could, yes, those things were observed. Could they go home and watch it on the TV? No.
No. Yeah, some of those people didn't know how to effectively use them or when to use them or any of that stuff.
But I don't mean to take away from that generation. We've obviously lost a lot of skill since then too. It's been replaced by technology. It's become a crutch, in that sense. So,
and in this era, it takes, you have to be personally very motivated and you have to have the desire to go, just because you can make it easier on a lot of different corners. If you want to really know the depth of the woods and how to hunt, you got to take it personal and like you backing off on certain cameras and stuff like that. Now, I'm still an opportunist like anybody else. If I get wind of a big buck or have an opportunity, I still want to hunt that deer.
Sure.
I'm not taking away from it. But for me, if let's say I moved to a place where all I ever did was hunt on the edge of a stubble field in the same couple different trees or whatever, I would lose my...
You get bored with it.
I'd get bored. I'd be wanting to go do other things.
You'd still do it. You'd say, okay, I'm going to shoot that one off the wheat field. And then, okay, now what? I'm going to expand my horizon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love the big country out west. I can't get enough of that. It's just, I mean, what I always tell people is I love when I step into places that I go, it could be 2024 right now, or it could be 1924. You couldn't tell the difference.
Couldn't tell the difference.
It's raw, wild, true. And then you've got all the other elements and stuff that you have to factor in, the cold temperatures, snow, even in the high country. I went from Florida to Montana for Christmas, and I started getting elevation sickness because I've been training at sea level.
Right. And they jump up to 8,000 feet or something.
Yeah. I'm sitting there just like, I've got headaches, and I'm like, gosh. And I got a buddy that wanted to go hike up the mountain, and I'm like, I don't even know if I can do it. I feel...
He's like, what, are you pregnant?
Feel like trash.
I got morning sickness.
They're doing that these days.
Yeah.
That's crazy, man. Yeah, and I think the cool thing even more so about that now is like that wild experience and feels even further distant than it ever has. I mean, look at how we're all in communication and everything that's around us and stuff. Like, so to step out into that open, vast landscape that's just, wild is like...
Jeremy's never been on an elk hunt, so if you need more motivation to make that happen,
we're gonna make that happen.
Yeah. The elk hunt I was on is in Kentucky.
Yeah,
and we'll give you the deets off camera, but there's we got a deal in place.
Yeah, we're working on something. So probably the most adventure hunt you've ever had would be our North Dakota trip, right?
To the Badlands.
Yeah. Which... Not to take away from that at all.
Not that adventurous.
Pretty attainable hunt. I mean, definitely adventurous for us. I mean, that was to drive that far.
But I mean, we had a base camp we went back to every night. We had heat showers.
It was safe.
Yeah, it was safe. Very safe.
We got to come back. We were on roads. We were in trucks most of the time. And that's great. I mean, that was an amazing hunt, and it will be an adventure to go.
The worst thing that could happen is we ran out of beer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Maybe step on a rattlesnake.
That'd be drastic.
Then we had to drive to Montana to go get it.
Yeah, that's the one I said to Baker, Montana. So like to step that up, you know what I mean? Like an elk hunt would offer that. A high country mule deer hunt would offer that. I think that's a natural progression.
Sure.
As opposed to like, let's go drop us off in the bush and hunt moose for, however long.
Yeah, in the Yukon or
That'd
something.
be-
I just do it.
We
jump in
could.
the bush.
Well,
Yeah.
we definitely could. We definitely could. But I think you want to experience a range.
For sure.
A progression, a range. If you just go straight to the bush, that's like a different thing.
Yeah. You don't want to. I mean, you're an experienced enough hunter that it probably wouldn't happen to you. But we definitely shy away. Even out there, we shy away.
This dude got lost in a acre and a half ditch in Illinois.
Yeah, it was more hangry, hangry related.
Okay, my blood sugar was low.
Yeah. I'm dehydrated. Yeah.
So I'm just saying we got to watch him in the bush.
No, I just mean
We're gonna put a tracking tag on him
for sure. I like out west too. It is. The environment is more harsh. It's less forgiving. Like even just in the sense, Glacier Park's not far from where I'm from. Every year somebody falls off something steep. They drown in cold water.
Sure.
They get too close to animals. People constantly underestimate Mother Nature, and that's why I go with the mountain man aspect, not just a hunter, because there's so many other dynamics to spending time in that stuff. But all that being said, they're just like you're saying, I'm not going to take someone who's on their first trip and go like, look, we're going right to the back country. And
that's adventure. I mean, dude, to know, like, maybe it's not how you feel about it in the moment, but it's like I could break my leg out here. Nobody would be here for days to find me. That's a thrill.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just be like, nobody's coming.
That same
I'm just
area
out here.
I told you about where we packed that elk out, another guy that I knew 2 years before in the same area killed a grizzly on the full charge on a cow elk that they had just harvested. And in his own description, the bear kind of came out through this passage in the timber and looked over and saw them and didn't even hesitate. He just came. And they just started unloading. And they were bow hunting, but they had their sidearms. And, Fish and Game came in and investigated. So they deemed it like life or death.
Yeah.
So,
had to do it.
Yeah. But I mean, that's a real factor. And actually in that country, this is why you don't take a greenhorn. The bears have started responding to even hunters like cow calling and stuff because it's a dinner bell. And they're even responding to gunshots back there in October where that bear might come from 3 miles away.
Wild?
Jeez.
Because he knows there's going to be a gut pile.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's probably the biggest adjustment for most whitetail hunters is like,
threats.
We've got, coyotes and bobcats. Like, we're not worried about shit when we walk in.
Right.
Yeah.
Except for the boogeyman in the dark that you keep, like, looking over your shoulder for.
Dude, we're so spoiled in Ohio. Like, there's nothing. There's no, I mean, there's coyotes and bobcats. They're not going to do anything. There's no poisonous snake. I mean, not where maybe they're in there, but not really. No real poisonous spiders. Like, no mega invasive,
walking through
I don't mean to sell it too hard, but it's pretty.
Yeah, it's pretty docile.
pretty gushy,
Yeah. There's not
even
not
compared to
much.
like the Midwest. Yeah, you go to like even our Illinois farm. You're like, hey, there's not that there's predators, but it's just you can tell you're getting further west. There's a little harsher. There's more invasive weed species. More. Yeah. It's still soft. Yeah, don't get me wrong. But the further you go, you get into the Dakotas, you start getting like
mountain lion country.
Yeah, there's some mountain lions there, and then the further west you go, you got grizzlies and more snakes and stuff. And further west you go, the tougher it gets for sure.
Yeah.
The South is a tough environment too. I mean, I lived in hunted Mississippi for 4 years, and I mean, coming from the North, which I felt very confident, and I hunted and explored a ton of that stuff. But man, you get way back in there where I'm not necessarily worried about the gators or anything, but like you're wading through like knee deep water, and you see what looks like a river otter, but it's a fucking water moccasin, moving through. You're like, shit.
If you had to pick, I've often thought like, what would be your kryptonite, terrain? What's the word? Ecosystem. Like if I was on Naked and Afraid, like the show, I wouldn't tell them this beforehand, but I'm like, I would feel pretty confident in most environments, but the Southeast is where I would be my kryptonite. It'd be like
hot, humid, and swampy,
and just the bugs and the snakes and whatever spiders are down. Just the marshy country. I'm like, it's not for me.
Yeah,
I'd have to agree.
No,
it's nasty.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's climates they couldn't do that in at all. On the Naked and Afraid aspect, like I was telling you,
you couldn't survive naked in like
Yeah. I spent
The dead
4
of
years in the
winter.
Arctic. I used to work in the oil fields back in the day, and it was polar bears, and
I guess you could. You'd have to kill something, like, and fur
you
up.
climb
pretty
in
quick
it, you know.
and have a
yeah.
fire.
Yeah, climb up inside it.
Yeah, Ace Ventura, that thing. And
Mm. Don't we know? I met the guy or the son of the guy or something that did the horse for the Revenant.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, you were not with me. I'm trying to remember
No.
who that was.
a heck of a scene, man.
He was like a taxidermist
Huh.
of sorts, and so
Yeah.
yeah, he did that horse carcass.
Damn, that's crazy.
Most of those river scenes were right up the road from my hometown there.
Really?
yeah,
Yeah.
in Montana.
hmm
Yeah, I mean that'd be wild stuff. Yeah, I mean there's I would say most of the areas that in the Midwest and some of the Northeast is pretty soft, but yeah, you get down in the Southeast. Well, if you get into like, there's not a lot of people deer hunting up there, but you get into like Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. I mean that's some pretty rough country up there.
Oh, they're deer hunting up there.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
pretty rough. That's rough country.
Yeah.
That's big country and rough country.
I don't think I've ever been to Maine. I'd like to visit there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, when you get into like Vermont and New Hampshire, like the White Mountain areas of, I think that's Vermont. Like that's
snowboarding
rough
in
country.
Vermont.
Well, even in New York, you get into like the Adirondacks. Like people look at like the Adirondacks, like it's huge, like a giant area. Like basically like Yellowstone, Grand Canyon, like all of those things would fit inside of the Adirondacks.
Oh wow.
It's a massive, massive wilderness area.
Yeah.
So you get into those places, and I mean, it's a sense of adventure, and maybe you don't have to worry about grizzly bears and stuff. I think that would be the biggest thing. It's like, there's definitely people I've talked to in like Wisconsin and Michigan that are squirrely on the wolves. Walking through and while it's dark or anything.
They're big.
And yeah, they're
What's a full grown wolf weigh? 150?
yeah.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big animal.
Mm.
Yeah. So I mean,
And a pack of them. I mean,
yeah.
they'll mess
people
you
get
up.
squirrely on that one for sure, but I don't know.
Is there a documented case of a pack of wolves killing a human
Oh, I'm sure.
recently?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about out. I haven't had one recently in Montana that I've noticed, but there was one up in Alaska. Young gal teacher like walking down a road on her morning run, and
Oh,
Yeah.
pack of wolves
Yep.
got her. But
wow.
The grizzly one is that's the one though. I mean, like, people in Pennsylvania will be like, man, I've seen black bears and it just dude, most black bears are scared the shit out of you unless you're in between them and cubs or something.
You ever seen a grizzly in the wild?
No.
No.
boy, you're in for it, man.
They're
I'm
pretty
sure
wild.
that's
Yeah.
like, it's like looking death in the face.
Well, it's just knowing like you're not it anymore.
Yeah.
Like
That's the king of the mountain.
he's it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Top of the food chain.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the gun gives you some peace of mind, but like, dude, they'll
Yeah,
take
but-
2 bullets and run at you.
Oh,
still,
yeah. Yeah, you better dump, and it better be a big gun.
You're better off to like preemptively find a tree to climb up and not even go that route, because it can happen, but I think people get overconfident with a sidearm that like they're going to be able if a bear's charging in close proximity.
Yeah.
They're coming no matter
They're
what.
coming.
Yeah.
And the odds of getting them completely dead before they get there is not very good.
Yeah.
That's why pepper spray has actually been that like counter assault has been really effective.
Has
'cause
it?
It's deterred a lot of bears because it actually like disorients them enough to turn them and get them kind of like shake them from their
Yeah, they're
focus.
focused.
Or
on
Yeah.
bullet, they probably just don't even feel it.
Yeah,
It's
they're just it's
Yeah.
adrenaline's pumping. They're just blowing right through.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be wild. That would be, I think, the biggest thing for most guys out east whitetail hunting to walk into that territory. That's why I think people pick Colorado, right? Because there's not a ton of grizzlies in that area. It's mostly black bears.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
actually
I
have a
think so.
book on my desk at home that says like the last grizzly, and there was an argument for many years that there weren't any grizzlies left,
Yeah,
and I believe there are a few.
but it's mostly black bear country and stuff,
Yeah.
which is not.
What is the primary grizzly range in the north, in the United States? It'd be Montana for sure.
Wyoming?
Anything east of Montana? Are they
No.
are they into the Dakotas at all?
No.
I don't think so.
Are they? What's south of Montana?
Wyoming.
Wyoming is south.
Yeah.
Idaho to the west.
Idaho for sure.
Yep. And then I don't think anything.
Is Montana or is Washington directly west of Montana?
Yeah, all you've got is
And they're in Washington for sure.
thin little
Are they?
sliver of the
I
Idaho
assume so.
panhandle is in between.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so-
probably. So
yeah.
they're probably in eastern Washington,
Because then they're right into
British Columbia.
British Columbia is directly north of,
Mhm.
and then they're in southeastern Alaska, obviously.
Yep.
all of
Correct.
Alaska.
But I don't think like if you go further south than Wyoming, like I don't think there are any. Colorado we just talked about. Utah.
Are there any grizzlies in California? Isn't it on their like flag?
That was like the golden bear.
Golden bear. That's but that's a black bear phase.
Okay.
I don't think that's a grizzly on it.
I swear that over the years I've heard stories of them being sighted. But
yeah, I don't know.
I don't know if there's any official.
You would think so, like northern
All the
Colorado
berries and stuff,
potentially.
like the wine vineyard. Those
No,
are grapes, I
there-
guess.
yeah, Napa Valley and stuff. There's nothing there.
Back in the day, though.
I don't know.
Probably.
I mean, I'm sure at some point.
What's between California and Washington?
Oregon.
Are there grizzlies in
I would
Oregon?
assume there's probably some in eastern Oregon because that's up against Idaho.
Mm-hmm. And then none in like Nevada.
Mm-mm.
None in Colorado.
Mm-mm.
None in like that little block.
Yeah,
of
and then you
states
get down into like a lot of people love hunting Arizona and New Mexico because there ain't shit down there that you're worried about when you're out there elk
Scorpions.
hunting and stuff. Yeah, rattlesnakes and scorpions.
Mm-hmm.
You got giant elk though.
Giant elk.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. So like, yeah, those are like, it's still challenging terrain and stuff and high elevations, but that's safe country from like a predator side of things. That predator aspect is just a whole different thing on top of like the physical challenge of the environment.
Right.
Mm-hmm. They got cats down there, mountain lions.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we're nasty with the mountain lions out in Montana.
Yeah.
Montana's, dude, you're
That's
the epicenter of kind of all of the
to me. That's like the rough
predators of the United
that
States.
Canadian Rockies area is like just screams just rough.
Yeah.
Like the terrain is rough.
That's just wild.
The animals are wild. Yeah, I mean it's like the last real frontier area.
Yeah. Love Montana. There are times I don't complain when I'm not in grizzly country though. That's kind of nice not to feel
Sure. Yeah, like
On
looking
edge.
over your shoulder every 5
all
seconds.
the time. But
Yeah.
It's terrifying. Have you ever been in grizzly country even?
No.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
I did, Dad and I were in Alaska, and we did
Mm-hmm.
that. We were in a Homer Spit, and we did that fishing trip down there. And before or after we launched out of the bay there, we took a kayak across the bay and got up. And they told us, they're like, hey, it's grizzly country. So I think we had a gun, or we had some deterrent for sure. But there was like sign everywhere.
Yeah.
Like we're walking down this trail, and it's like there's bear tracks in the trail, and you see trees all like destroyed and stuff. And it's just like it's an eerie feeling to be like in bear country.
Yeah. No, I'm sure.
yeah, when you know you're in them, especially like you're just saying, I mean, because you do feel like it can be at any.
Yeah.
You swear you're hearing, like you're coming
Yeah.
around a corner, you're like,
Yeah.
you're like, did you hear something?
And actually, that's what they do when
Your hair
when
stands
you're
up on your
close
back.
and they're pissed. Is they chop their
Yeah.
teeth and they hoof at you, and it's bad when you get those signs from them, their ears tucked back and they're woofing at you and chopping their teeth.
Yeah, that's too close for
It's
comfort.
it's time to get
Yeah.
somewhere else. But the problem with the scary thing about grizzlies, and this is where there's been all these over the years. Recently, there's been quite a few attacks with increase of people coming to Glacier and Yellowstone and other places. Is that they still typically don't want interaction with you,
right.
but on a food source or with cubs,
Yeah.
they're just
That's it.
it's almost a guaranteed interaction
Yeah,
if
it's
you're
just a
close
natural
enough.
behavior out of them,
Yeah.
the reaction wise.
So that's what's so tough is like you could be walking down a trail and come around the corner and look up and there's two cubs in between you and
Yeah,
Mom.
not good.
and it's a bad situation immediately.
Pretty sure I've had nightmares about that, like just being between them and desperately trying to get out of in between them, and it's just like she's not having it.
Yeah, I mean that's where like I don't, I'm in rattlesnake and copperhead country. Like I don't worry about any of that stuff. It's just like
Yeah.
I go.
Just watch the ground.
I'd be way out of my element in grizzly country. Like that would be my kryptonite probably.
You think so?
I 100%
Oh, boy.
believe so.
Well, we're gonna get you out there.
I believe that will be like I'll be like gripping a 10 millimeter like head on a swivel type of thing.
Yeah.
But I to the point where like the first time I bet it will take away from the hunt because I'll just be all paranoid out of my ass. I just won't even be thinking about hunting. I'll just be like surviving.
Yeah, it's definitely a factor.
Yeah.
It's a headspace.
just surviving. Because like when we talk to Troy, when we talk to Pottinger about that stuff, like in Idaho, and like he's hunting, giant whitetails and like grizzly and wolf country, and it's like as much like physically, I'd love that stuff. I like the physical challenge because I try to stay in shape. Like I keep good, like that.
Yeah.
I feed off of that, like feeling good in that country. Altitude would take time to get used to, but yeah, I don't know if I could do it. From I mean, obviously, if I live there, like you adapt to it. But like as an Eastern guy going to that,
you could do it.
I don't know if I could.
It's just you could do it. Come on.
I don't know if I could.
It's just a factor. It's one of those things. It's like it's a danger, but once you just learn to respect it, you know, and then you want to be trained and you want to understand how to react.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm astute enough in the woods to be like, you know, understand what's going on, not like naive vacationer type dude, but like, almost to over analyzing it.
Right.
I don't think it'll go. Yeah, I don't know if I'd be able to do it.
You know what's funny though is after all of that being said, you know, people come out to Glacier Park and all that stuff. They read all the scary bear books and all this stuff, and they think that a bear's coming out of every
and they don't ever see one.
And I mean, I've spent my entire life out there. I've always carried my 44 mag on my hip, and I've never had to use it.
Getting eaten by a bear would suck. Yeah, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I'm with you on the consequences. It's a high consequence.
Yeah, I mean the consequence is not seeing a bear or running into like that's just
you just don't want to get eaten by a bear slowly.
Yeah,
I did when I was
that wouldn't feel good.
When I was in college. I played football my freshman year, and one of my teammates had his career ended on a bow hunt by getting attacked by a grizzly. Yeah,
I mean, there's what were the kids? Was that California or Nevada that he died from the mountain lion attack? Cougar basically grabbed him by the throat and drug him off, and then that was just recently, like within the last year. Yeah, they were out scouting for hunting or turkey hunting, maybe. I can't remember, but it was out west, and there were two of them, young kids, like, I don't know, 20 or 21, and mountain lion came off the ledge. Like, they looked up and saw it, and they didn't have any firearms with them.
Oh, I remember hearing about that.
Came off the ledge, basically grabbed the one guy. His buddy tried to get him off. It attacked him. He got it off, and then it went back on his friend, so the guy ran out to get help. By the time he came back, it already killed his buddy.
Yeah.
Just, straight at the throat.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's, wolves, obviously. So, yeah, I mean, they're definitely, and I think probably more so, like, especially, like, that was probably closer to town. Like, some of these things, wolves being one, cougars being the other, like, they're just getting adapted to human presence. Yeah. The fear of humans is just not there anymore. That's why, in Glacier or Yellowstone, like, most of like bears or mountains, they don't fear humans. No. There's zero fear of humans.
Cruising through neighborhoods, backyards.
They don't care.
That's one place that I saw a grizzly was in Glacier.
In Glacier.
We were like on a tour bus or something, and like they're like, oh, just right here. Everybody turn their head, like right by the main office. There's a grizzly just standing on the shore there.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's as human presence continues to get closer to that, you're gonna have more conflicts. It's just part of it. But yeah, I mean, it's funny because like you hear people from like all over the place like talk about things. There's a lot of people that like I went to school with down south, and they're like, man, like they wouldn't walk through the woods or wade through water until like it was daylight. Like they're just like, I'm not doing it. I'm like, what are you scared of? Like, moccasins or gators? And
right.
Like, exactly. I'm like, you just go through. Like, they don't wanna bother you, you know, but yeah, I mean, there's people that will walk even like in Kentucky or up in northern Pennsylvania, like they won't walk through any of that stuff without, snake boots on and stuff, because they're like, man, there's rattlers all over the place and stuff. And there are.
I remember, I mean, like the first time I went to Kansas, I was terrified. It was funny, like thinking back on it, like we were tiptoeing through fields, like back to our like stands, and like, I'm like, there's snakes here, and now I'm like,
wearing like
don't even think about
shoes.
it. I haven't seen one ever. Yeah, I'm just go for it.
Same in the Dakotas. We had like gaiters on, and we're like walking around, and then like eventually it's like.
And you still want to be mindful, like it's still in the back of your mind.
They are there.
Yeah.
It's just.
And I think grizzlies are probably, maybe a higher version of that, but a similar mindset to where you're like, you're gonna be petrified the first time until you're like, oh, I've seen a few. Okay, here's their demeanor. Here's
that's what they do.
Yeah, you kind of understand their nature a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I do think there's also the dynamics of, scent, and there's a lot of things you can prepare for out there. Like a lot of
don't like take a fish oil bath before you go out. Or
and actually, you want to, if you're doing it right, like if you're in the backcountry there, you're taking all your gear and everything in there. Now they make the nice like scent lock containers and stuff like that you can lock stuff up in, but it used to be that you hang everything and you don't hang it near where you're sleeping.
Right. Yeah. You don't want to bring them right to your campsite.
Yeah. There, a lot of the stuff, unfortunately, the stories you hear, it's also just like, gosh,
it's negligence.
They weren't being mindful at all. And the last one down there with this grizzly kind of near Yellowstone just got this gal. There was a known grizzly in that area, and they had warned everybody about camping in that area and stuff.
Just the demeanor of that animal.
The choice to go in there and camp anyway, and not, I mean, again, I feel for the person. It's tough. I mean, because again, a lot of it's ignorance. It's like the people go Yellowstone and like, hey, honey, go stand by the buffalo and let's get a picture.
So stupid.
Grab his horn.
Yeah.
Take life by the horn.
Yeah. Well, it's like
that actually happened though.
It's like it's not gonna I actually grabbed it. That was me grabbing the.
I'm just kidding, but seriously.
It's like the grizzly guy in Alaska who made all the videos, and eventually like him and his girlfriend got eaten by him.
Yeah.
What'd you expect? You were like living amongst a bunch of grizzlies. Like, eventually, one of them's gonna get pissed off and kill you.
And they were even evading like the fish and game. They were trying to get him out of there, and they're like moving camp every night, so they couldn't.
Yeah.
And they're trying to save them. They're trying to get them out of danger.
Exactly. Yeah, just negligence to it. Yeah, it's kind of wild, but I do feel for like from a whitetail side, it's kind of crazy when we hear about like Pottinger and Idaho and stuff, but like the guys in Wisconsin and Michigan who are dealing with wolves, I mean, their herds are decimated. And because of the way that wolf is structured basically in the endangered species coverage and stuff, like there are no hunting of wolves in Michigan or in Wisconsin. And so these populations are just continuing to expand and herds are getting decimated up there.
Seriously.
Just mauled. And so, I mean, a lot of these guys who had, extremely rich traditions, like you talk about the UP of Michigan, they're like, I mean, here's one that survived. That's the conversations that are happening now.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Sever.
Well, one of the biggest things that we always talk about is what our arrow setups are. And this year we're shooting the Sever broadheads. I think we're both shooting the new 2-inch titanium broadhead. And so, we're huge proponents of expandables. And I know we've had this argument back and forth with people, but we're right and you're wrong, and you just need to accept it.
We
just want to have a giant wound that pumps out blood. That's the bottom line.
We build our arrow setups and shoot bows, to maximize penetration, and we shoot broadheads that are going to give us the best blood trails, the most hemorrhage possible. And so part of those setups is we're also shooting the Easton arrows here coming up pretty soon. So we've shot the Victory in the past, and there's all kind of great arrow shafts on the market, but like we're looking for a whole system from broadhead to arrow components to the arrow shaft itself. And, the more we look at some of these Easton shafts and the components that go with them, that setup's going to be really deadly for us.
Yeah, I'm actually using the Easton traditional axis right now in my traditional setups for both my recurve and my longbow. I've got a 100-grain brass insert on those, and then obviously I'm using a fixed blade broadhead on those specific shafts.
Right on.
So, but our goal is always to be shooting the best broadhead that we think is going to be the most lethal for our setups. We've done plenty of research. We believe in the Sever broadheads, and we hope you would check them out at Sever Broadheads as well.
Well, talk to us about the art studio and like what your dad's doing in art now, and what you and your business partner and your brother are kind of like getting into.
Sure. So a good place to start, I think, is kind of where we started at the beginning of this was, post the Alaska days. My dad actually he was a wildlife biology major. He'd done taxidermy at this point for years, had a great understanding of especially whitetail, but wildlife anatomy. And I think he just wanted like a change of pace and a change of speed. And he did his first whitetail sculpture. And I mean, the first one was great. Did it out of oil-based clay, and started garnering a lot of attention almost right away.
Did he have painting or art experience before that?
No, he's self-taught.
That's so wild.
Okay, so that wasn't his first one. It was his first released one.
No, that was his first one.
The first try ever. It was just a great painting.
Well, no, he sculpted first.
So he was making sculptures.
Yeah, oil-based clay, and then they ended up taking to a foundry and cast in bronze.
Cast in bronze.
Yeah. So he started doing those, and I don't remember which was the first monument, but he did the big one for Bass
Cabela,
Pro. Yeah, Cabela's and Bass Pro.
And he just had like a shoe-in because he was known in the industry, like and as a collector and stuff.
Yeah, he already had a name, and I think people were kind of blown away, like, oh, Dick Idol's doing...
Well, and I'm sure nobody else was really doing whitetail deer sculptures,
No.
right? Like, it doesn't seem like, at the time, besides, like, you know, our core group, it's like, you know, who would commission those things?
Yeah.
Well, you know, Dick and Jim Cabela would, Johnny Morris would.
Yeah, and the one in Springfield there, that one was crazy because nowadays they can scale something up, or like you can do, they call it a maquette when you do a miniature of what the bigger one's gonna, like a monument. They'll sculpt a small one first, and say we're gonna blow this up. But nowadays they can scale it up to size, keep the proportions of all the anatomy and everything correct, and they can like laser cut that out of foam, then reapply the clay, and then resculpt all the details and stuff. And they can cut it into pieces and mold it now and transport it. Like when we did the Arkansas project, we flew a molding crew out to Montana that came and molded all the hogs and whitefish there, and then took the molds, left the clay, didn't even take the sculpture, took the molds back down to Loveland, Colorado to cast them. The one he did that big one for Springfield in Lander, Wyoming back in the day. And it's like they had 2 stories of scaffolding next to it, but he had to sculpt the whole thing from start to finish in the foundry because there was no way they're going to be able to transport. Plus, he didn't have a place that he could have done something that big. And it was probably back then, it could have been, 15, 20,000 pounds of clay because they also weren't, nowadays too, they can even cast them hollow. So if you look inside a new bronze, because bronze is so expensive in the process, back then, pick up a bronze that's like 200 years old and they are so dense and... But so he gets into that and it starts to get that attention. But what's crazy, then he went on and did a scene of whitetails that's out in front of Anadarko Oil's headquarters. He sculpted this one was a person, but like Jamestown in North Carolina, like a life-size bust of the guy that founded the town.
Oh, wow.
Then he did NC State and Arkansas.
I wonder if he did the ones, there's whitetails on the mountain that look very similar to like the Cabela's ones. Is it now it's a casino, but it used to be.
It's not at Nemacolin, right?
Well, it's behind Nemacolin, but it's at like Lady Luck Casino. But it used to be
you're right.
a sportsman's headquarters or something.
It looks exactly like one. I've driven past that.
It's giant up there.
We'll have to look it up because I'd like to see it. I mean, he did so much in his heyday there that I don't know all of them.
Is there one in front of the Whitetail Properties headquarters?
There is.
Did you do that one?
I don't know.
Yeah, there's a giant one.
I assume he's got like a book of like all the ones he's ever done.
Yeah, he does. He's got it broken down, but it's and most of them are on his website on his kind of like portfolio page. But so self-taught there, and then one other segment I won't go way into because it could be a whole podcast. But he at one point they started this company out east that called RWG, but it was basically like Dick Idol Ventures. But they used his name almost like Martha Stewart does for products. At one point in time, he had a show. It was called Montana Expressions, but they had, clothing in Cabela's, Dick Idol stuff. There was Dick Idol jerky at one point you could buy in the store, but this company called Big Sky Carvers did this awesome series of like desk sculptures from him that you can still find them sometimes today on like eBay. I've gone back and tried to collect as many as I could, but he did little busts of, like I've got a bust of the Gould buck that he did.
Yeah.
That's why that is one of my favorite deer.
Yeah.
But he did the hole in the horn and but so long story short, that goes on for years.
I can't believe it was self-taught. Like it just seems like
they're too good.
Well, yeah, I mean like my background's as a wildlife biologist. I love deer. Like if you ask me to carve a deer, it'd look like a turd at the end of it. Like I'm artistically challenged essentially.
And I think I'm even more impressed by later he self-taught himself how to paint because I've done both. And the one thing about like oil-based clay is it never dries. So it is more forgiving. Like you can sculpt something and if you don't like, you can make changes.
You can change it. And
you can keep sculpting till you get a desired result. Whereas like the painting, even mixing the proper colors is so difficult. Like, and I don't know, I showed you my brother's work, but like my brother, when you see, you'll see what I'm talking about, but hardly ever a color on one of his paintings is as the paint comes out of the tube. So he's not only got to
Always
see
mixing.
it before, and it's very vibrant, powerful color. But
I described it like illuminated. It's like, how does it look like there's lights on the painting?
Yeah, it's incredible. So, I mean, but originally my dad self-taught himself how to paint well enough that he actually taught my brother how to paint. And, just to make a plug for my brother, Cody Idol, if you see, I mean, he's one of the more prominent Western artists out there today.
Wow.
And he's carved his own path and really become like a big name out west there. And
I think I've seen some of his stuff. He does a lot of that like Western looking, like, buffalo, cowboy-esque.
yeah,
types.
there's a lot of teepees and,
Yep.
and mountain scenes, a lot of wildlife, but and he loves stuff in the Tetons and stuff like that too. But I guess the progression here that takes us to what's sitting in here right now is that, so, about 15 years ago now, my family started the Dick Idol Gallery in Whitefish.
And whitefish. Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of other artists and stuff too. It's not just like our family's work. But then somewhere in the first like 6 or 8 years, the gallery started to get a lot of traction and really developed a great name up there and became a prominent Western gallery. So we started getting bigger name artists and, but about, I'd say 10 years ago now, we were introduced to the idea of doing the reproductive prints.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like the first time that it was thought of as something that could be, I mean, scalable, but you could find this niche where it didn't have to be just what you see on the rack at like Target or something like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Hobby
have
Lobby.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be mass produced. We want it to be based off of real great art and have the kind of quality, essentially to the point where
Saying Hobby Lobby doesn't have great art?
Hobby Lobby has fantastic art. No.
Christmas decorations.
That's a
out right
Christian-based
now.
company.
Yeah.
God will strike you down if you do this on Hobby Lobby.
But what we didn't want is to have this big noticeable difference between the originals and the prints.
Yep.
And the technology with how they can print and everything is so incredible now that we can basically reproduce. We can frame a print in the same frame as the original and put them on the wall and ask someone, tell us which one is the original, which one's the print, and most people can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So we started developing that with my brother's work and built this print program that has really taken off over the years. So to flash forward to where we are now, David Frederick Riley is the artist that I work with. I work with Colt too, but David is arguably the most sought after Western painter out there.
And is he out of Montana?
He lives just outside of Park City in Utah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Very different style than my brother, but he's just freakishly talented. And he's one of my favorite artists ever. But in a funny way, it was through our gallery. He started to show work in our gallery handful of years ago. And I had the pleasure of meeting him out there at an art function and ended up deciding I wanted to approach him about doing the same print program with him. And it just became this awesome partnership, friendship that blossomed into this. And now we have, prints in 50 stores in the U.S. And we have this website. We send them all over the world. And but what brings us to this piece here that's so cool is I've prayed about, how do I bring my love of the outdoors and the art together, because it's something that they do ride along next to each other. Like, it seems like people who have a love and a passion for the outdoors are fascinated by good art, especially wildlife art and stuff. But where is the crossover? And so back in April, I went to Canada on that big shed hunting trip with Matt Beard and my dad and all those guys. And I came home and it just popped into my head. I'm like, why aren't we putting an emphasis on specifically on whitetails? And I was getting all this traction and social media and stuff suddenly from whitetails.
It's the king of the market.
Yeah,
in the hunting space.
Hands
You want to
down.
own it, you own the whitetail.
Yeah. So, I get home and I'm like, I have an idea. So I called up David Riley and I just said, what do you think about, because he's not like a hunter by trade, like he loves the outdoors too and stuff, but he's not a hunter. And he's done deer and elk and moose and stuff and beautiful paintings, but never an emphasis on specific deer or anything.
Sure.
So I said, what if we really keyed in on some of these famous deer? And he loved the idea, and we sat around like looking at, you know, different deer for a few days and the backstories and stuff. So we decided to call the collection the Kings of the Fall, and that's our new collection here. And so basically, like once a month, we're taking a famous deer and we're adding to the collection. So we did the Breen buck on the first one, and that one's actually on our website on davidfrederickriley.com. But then this one that you guys have, since I've already told you, this is the Hansen buck, but you guys have the first one. The original painting is still for sale. It's just got finished, and, you know, it'll be a $20,000 piece. And so I thought it'd be cool for you guys to have the first one.
I didn't know that was the Hansen buck. You didn't tell me.
Well, no, I didn't tell you. I didn't want him to tell me either, but I knew.
I mean, we talked a lot of shop, and he kept being like, hey, don't tell me too much yet, but I just get excited. And
I'm stoked about it now.
And we even went as far, just to have fun with it, we even created, so for whenever the show comes out, we created a HUNTR promo for the website too. So if people want to use...
Oh,
dude,
word.
that's freaking awesome.
If they want to use... And it doesn't have to be the Kings of the Fall. It can be any of the...
Oh, word. Awesome.
Like,
Very
not
cool.
even seeing this thing yet. Like it's one of the most, I guess, called pleasurable things when I go to like a consumer expo is like to find, you know, the different artists at that consumer expo and like walk through their displays and stuff. And like, you know, I find myself torn so many times of like, it all looks awesome, you know, and you're standing there, the artist is there, right? So they're oftentimes like, you know, you try to put an emphasis on like, you know, this guy or girls put a ton of effort into this, but you can't relate to it because like I don't paint.
You don't know the person. That's what it is.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of ways. I mean, the same way neither you or I have like the sleeves that we're talking. Like I've wanted a tattoo for a couple of years now. The only reason I haven't done it is I don't have a relationship with a guy that I'm like.
Yep.
I understand where they're coming from.
They know
we
me,
can
they
discuss it or
understand me,
whatever level. You just want to feel an attachment. And so even though, give me your business partner's name again, the painter.
David Frederick Riley.
So even though I haven't met David, I don't know David, I feel like you've done an awesome job representing him and your guys' relationship, and I understand where you're coming from. We've talked now for 3 hours. I feel a connection to this piece. And we talked earlier about the Hansen buck, and I'm glad we haven't seen it yet because now I have... You know, I've obviously heard of these bucks, and like we've heard the stories, you know, over time and stuff. But now I'm like, it's fresh in my mind. I'm like, I understand the dynamic now that it had with the Rompola buck.
Yeah, wait, you mean this isn't the Rompola buck?
and from your perspective, and so now, it's like you want to feel connection to a piece like this.
Yeah.
So.
And what's so cool about him, it's just like with these big deer, the ones that have the really cool stories behind them. So like he actually was a portraiture artist before. And so his figures and people are just
off the charts,
incredible.
Yeah.
And he's so talented that like he'll complete one first and actually break down some of the properties like on the edges and stuff, so it's not too like photorealistic.
Yep.
So he actually like artistically loses some edges on purpose. But one thing notable that no other artist is doing, he has a proprietary mineral spirits mix that he makes. That every painting there's multiple different stages in the painting process, but he actually drips these mineral spirits and like flicks it on the canvas, and it actually chemically separates the paint and makes it like a watermark effect.
Oh yeah. And
so no two paintings are ever exactly alike, and they're very unique. And so some of them have a lot of that droplet, and that was something that was an accident years ago. He actually spilled some on a painting. And the story more or less goes that he chucked this painting to the side and was like, dang it, I ruined one. Because that stuff, they use like...
Classic painter story.
They use terpenoids and turpentine and stuff to like clean paint.
Clean up.
So he spilled something that was a cleaning solution first. And then later, a couple days later, sees it sitting in the shop on the floor and is like, hey, that looks
pretty awesome.
And it's become one of his signature, components. Now, the deer will progress as we go because this is a new thing. Like, what he'll do with them, he evolves a lot. So if you look him up at some point, you'll see like there's a heavy emphasis with him on the eyes. Like when you look at one of his paintings, like you can't hardly not like make direct eye contact with him.
You feel like you're just staring into it.
Yeah. And so the deer doing more of like a full body, you're not quite as like keyed in on just the eyes as just his style and stuff. And so, I was telling Jared, it's like the Breen buck, we went more like almost like black and white, and wanted to get more color in the Hansen buck. So, and I don't know which one I like more. Like I love his more black and white stuff, but I love this color too, a little warmth to it. So yeah, I mean,
should we open it?
Yeah, open it up, man.
Before you open it, so where are people finding this? And we'll talk about it at the end too.
Sure. So just his name, David Frederick Riley. So just davidfrederickriley.com, and there's a whole print section.
Awesome.
And we ship these for free anywhere in the world.
Holy balls.
So someone can get, 10% off with their hunter promo and then free shipping. So
what is the promo?
It's HUNTR, HUNTR.
HUNTR. You could just put that in that promo code section.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Thank you for doing that.
Of course.
Here, I'll get up and do
I'm
this.
stoked. Yeah.
And this is just a joy to share because it's something we've been working on for 3 years. And when you start anything, the first couple years is like nobody but you knows about it.
Sure.
It's just so it's fun to share it. It's fun to see other people enjoy it.
And when do you do the Breen buck? When was that one released?
The Breen buck came out in May.
May,
yeah.
Yep.
So there's only one Kings of the Fall item actually on the website that this Hansen buck is about to get put on.
So
there.
it's in that process of being,
And I put this one in a traditional floating frame. It's ready to hang on the wall.
Whoa, that's freaking cool, dude.
Yeah, it's pretty epic.
Damn. Yeah, like you see the mineral spirits marks. Got it.
Yeah,
And if
I
you-
like the color a lot. This is the
That's
mineral
wild.
spirits down here you're talking about?
Yeah, that's all from those mineral
yeah.
spirits.
Oh, and all up here too.
Yeah. And if you don't, here, I might pull that
Dude, that's so
plastic
cool.
off too.
Yeah, we
Okay.
can do that.
And the plastic's thin. You can just peel it. Shouldn't be
Yeah, I got you here.
just so we can get a good, because the plastic tends to catch some.
Catch some light.
Yeah.
There we go. Gotcha.
There you guys go.
Man, that's beautiful.
Dang, that's so cool. Yeah, that's awesome. That's like what I see in my dream. just a little bit, fuzzy, but he's there. I know who he is.
And what's funny is we were joking. We almost just hauled off and sent you a big one, but at first we
That's
did.
not a big one?
That's a good one to start with.
This is like a mid-size for us.
Really?
Yeah. And so again, that's what makes it so special on the free shipping too, is because art is super expensive to ship.
Sure.
And so we just have it built into our setup that we don't charge shipping.
Dang.
So even
what is that? Like a 24 by
I think
30?
it's a 3630, I believe.
3630.
Yeah.
So what is when he's painting the actual one, how big is that?
I want to say that it was a 60 by 40, or maybe it was a little. He paints big sizes.
Paints big sizes.
Yeah.
So then it's just scaling it down from there.
Yeah. Once we get a proper image file of it, we can scale it, and we actually go all the way. Like the fun thing is we do miniatures of these, so you can get a.
Why don't you just make sure, Jeremy, hold it in front of you so this camera can see it, like a clear
And look
shot.
what happens when the light hits it too. Like look how much it warms up.
Yeah. Oh, is there actually light coming in from the back there?
There might be a little bit.
Because I can just see. There's no backing on it, right? It's just
Nope.
you can see
No.
through the
Yeah.
canvas. Cool.
Can you see my hand?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool.
So that makes me want to make a plug for proper art lighting. But yeah, if you ever
absolutely.
get that's why galleries, we get so caught up on getting the lighting just right.
Would
I
you
really
you
like
put-
the floating frame.
Yeah, that's really cool too.
Yeah, so we're having a lot of fun with it, and I can't wait to expand on this collection and see what, I'm making lots of recommendations, and he's kind of selecting which deer he likes. So I can't wait to see which one he does. We haven't done a big non-typical yet, and I want to see how that.
Yeah,
the
that would be
response is.
cool.
Yeah.
Part of the reason I didn't want to recommend like the hole in the horn first is
That's good, Jeremy.
is painting it. It's like, what's it going to be like to have to paint the hole in the horn buck? There's so much going on, but
Dang.
Yeah, he's awesome.
That's wild.
Thank you for that.
man.
of course, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I mean, especially, saying that like, David's not coming from like a hunting background necessarily. Like that's always a tough thing, I think, for me. You mentioned the tattoo aspect of things. Like I remember the first time I was talking to someone about it, they were like, they just didn't get it. They're
Yeah.
like, okay, so you just want like a deer, and like their drawing was like what you would think somebody who just like cartoons a deer.
Right.
Right, where it's like, no, I want like a life, like I want you to look
to look
at
like a
it
deer.
like it's a real deer, and they're like, yeah, that's what this is. I'm like, No.
Yeah.
Like a real deer. Like, and so it, you know, for him to be able to like envision that, because I think, you know, that's what's so cool, whether it's deer or elk or whatever, like as hunters, I think a lot of non-hunters have a tough time understanding, like, dude, when you see just a big mature buck or bull or, you know, whatever, you're almost in awe.
Yeah.
Because you're just like, this animal is just, it's majestic. It's a powerful animal to look at and see. And so when somebody who just doesn't look through that lens and sees, like, they're like, oh, look, that's like a big buck. And you're like, oh my God, yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
They don't see it through that same lens. So it's really cool for him to, like, you know, even looking at the face of the animal, like, I feel like you really, you know, he wanted you to feel like you were looking at like the Hanson buck.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I love here too, and this, I feel like this is an answered prayer, is that, you know, getting involved with my family too on the business end with David, I think he got to see the passion and the why we love it. And I think when we started, I think if I would have asked him to do this, you know, a couple years ago, he probably still would have considered it. But I think it's after what he's been exposed to that he actually was like, okay, there's a whole different element to this than just, like, I joke about when I was a kid, most non-hunters thought all hunters were like Elmer Fudd types.
Sure.
You know, and there's so much more to it. And, you know, you separate like the history that I always talk about with my dad. That is really, if someone said, what is your goal in this industry? My goal is to share as much of that, what made hunting special and like the historical, the heritage and the good old days, the trailblazers and all that. And I think that's kind of like rubbed off on David. And so he really, it's just done my heart a lot of good because he wasn't just like open to it. He was excited about it. And it was kind of like, even after he did it, he's like, I need to talk to your dad.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. I'm sure, like, because your dad has like both viewpoints, the artist in him, but also the deer fanatic in him.
Yeah.
So I feel like, you know, David being able to spend some time and talk to your dad in that, because, you know, that's what I guess, because we all are crazy about it, but like, you know, I'd love to pick your dad's brain of like, you know, when he's making these sculptures or doing paintings and stuff, like, you know, what's he calling to in his head essentially? Yeah. You know, is it a specific vision? Is it more of a memory and an experience? Like, you know, that what's he bringing out that then he is translating to a sculpture and or a painting, that, because that's what, you know, you look at something like this and like anybody who's ate up with it can put themselves in a position where they're looking at that deer in real life. Yeah. You know, and that's what's so cool, I think, about a lot of these paintings is like, when you look at them, it's like, whether it's a, you know, we've all seen like the scene with the Indians or, you know, a big buck in front of an old barn or whatever. And it's like, you know, you put yourself in that fall feeling and you're like, man, I could see myself like being in that spot, like in real life. Yeah. And that capture is really, I think, what pulls a lot of people in, because by nature, like most hunters would say are not, you know, art fanatics. Sure. Right. But we all love fall from like a color standpoint. And like, there's those visions that we have that it's like, that is art in our heads.
Well, and think about this in the artistic value side of it. How many times have you seen something that really resonated with you when you've been out in the field and you come home and even try to tell your family or your friends?
Yeah, you can't describe it.
It's so difficult. And you don't want to be too like foo-foo, but you're like, man, just the way the lights were coming through the timber. Yeah. Suddenly the woods felt like it was quieter and something changed. Like I could almost feel that deer was there. You know, there was fog coming off this pond over here. But there's a moment in time that you want to share and it's really hard to translate. So if an artist gets to a spot that calls that from you, and that's what we get when a painting really resonates with someone, that's kind of what we're talking about, is like a call. And what was so cool, the Breen buck was the first original that actually went to the Dick Idol gallery, and it made it on the wall for like a day. Wow. Before the original sold. But the guy that was a longtime hunter, but he hadn't put the pieces together yet, and he was already sold on getting the painting, and when he found out it was the Breen buck, he lost it.
Yeah, jumped all over it.
And he even said, it made it so much more special for me because I already knew I loved it. And, you know, it's just loose enough that you could look and not, if you don't know all the big heads from, maybe you don't know, but yeah, I think that's going to be the crossover of why this collection's so popular, because they're not just big deer.
Yeah, they're known.
Yeah.
They're iconic.
Is there any, I mean, I don't mean to get in the weeds on it. Is there like any, can they trademark like a deer? Is there like a likeness thing to be like, well, that's...
Deer are tough.
Like when you paint, like on this one, I guess is like, are you going to get death threats?
Well, and the funny thing is I kind of step into that going like, if there was, I could see with some of the biggest deer that are most publicized, especially if one was like recently killed and they're doing stuff right now with it.
Yeah.
Maybe. But at the end of the day, all that we're going to do if someone ever comes...
Just going to make the deer more famous.
Yeah.
I mean,
and if someone came in and said, hey, stop it, and it's, we're just going to stop. We'll just cut that one out.
Yeah, cut that one out of the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny when you talk about that iconic side of it, because like, yeah, no joke. And it's probably, I bet we got them when Emily and I got married. So like 2010 ish is I have a set of like, I don't know if it's 4 or 5 big oval shaped Christmas ornaments with, hole in the horn. It's Jordan buck. Like it's got whatever 5 iconic bucks from the collection, and so I don't know if those drawings are like your dad's. Very possible, right?
Possible, yeah.
I mean, at that time, like it was probably those key bucks that he had, and I'm sure I bought it at Bass Pro or somebody got it for us at Bass Pro. But like, every Christmas, like when I'm digging out the ornaments, like I get that box and like I put those on,
right?
Because it's like holding the horn, like those iconic, you're just magnetized by them.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. We tried even too, like that deer, the specific deer from this is actually from some of his own like photo reference of a different deer. And it's not a specific body posture or image that was ever taken from.
I mean, he did a great job because that reminds me of like a racehorse looking, what I would expect that Hansen buck to look like.
He did a really nice job, I think, capturing like the personality. Like when you look at, when you look at the demeanor of that deer, it's like he's aware of your presence, but he's not, I wouldn't even say he's alert. He's just, he seems at ease. Like he sees you and he's like, okay with it.
Well, and he also isn't like ears back, like I'm ready to fight type, because, he probably wasn't that style of deer.
Well, even like his neck posture, if his head was like 2 inches higher, he would be alert. Like he's picking you off. And this one here, he
knows you're there.
He's dominant and he's come over the hill and he's seen you, but he's not worried about it.
Well, I think that structure of his neck and his shoulders is very much still in that, like it's rut and I'm maturing, but I'm not mature. Like there is no, some of those 5 and 6 year olds, it goes shoulders, head. Right. There is no neck. Very defined muscular structure on that deer.
Yeah, it's awesome. I love it, man.
That's so cool.
I'm glad you guys like it.
That's awesome. I mean, yeah, that'll be.
I'm gonna put it over Jeremy's shoulder so I can look at it.
That'll be really cool to have here, man. I love the idea of dictating. And we kind of talked about this with CJ's buck a little bit. It's like those, and it's every deer, but like those deer, just they deserve recognition. They deserve praise. Like they. They're once in a lifetime type animals, right? And, I think that, we're at a point in society where these deer, Hansen's deer, hole in the horn, Breen buck, like all of those deer, Jordan buck, are iconic 50 years plus later in many cases, because they were such a once in a lifetime rare deer. And like, those deer didn't exist back then, right? And even now, like a Hansen deer still doesn't exist. But you get to the point now where because of cameras and social media and stuff, like we just see big deer all the time. And even when people are killing big deer, it's like, none of them get the recognition. None of them will have like that, like even I think about like the Huff buck and stuff like that is number 2 right now, right? I mean, it's sitting right behind Hansen, and it's like, yeah, I mean, but if you talk to most deer hunters, they don't know what the Huff buck is. They have no idea, and even if you showed them a picture, they're like, yeah, maybe I've seen that. Everybody's seen the Hansen deer.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that deer.
What you're going to have happen is, well, I was going to say 2 things first. The first is we love to glorify the animal. We just do. That's why taxidermy exists. You know, that's why, I mean, so we want to put them on a pedestal. We want to show everybody and have like, you want to do it justice. You want to be like, this was this trophy. This was this beast that I hunted and I was successful, and here's the story, and there he is on the wall. And there absolutely is a market for continuation of that, especially because most of those deer you only ever see dead on the wall. You don't see in a real world environment. You're like, how many people I've ever seen the handsome buck standing there looking at you? Yeah. You know, and it's like, granted, that's not the real deer, but there he is. That's like the best our you know, a world famous artist can portray it. You're going to absolutely have people reaching out asking you to paint their bucks. Yeah. You know, absolutely. Yeah. There's a company doing that now. They're more just, I think, prints. I can't think of what they're.
Yeah, I got one. Remember, Emily got me one for Father's Day with white whale in Kansas.
And I remember when I saw that, I was like, those will sell. And I've on multiple occasions, I might even still.
I think they're digitized essentially. You know, it's taking the rack, digitizing it on a buck in a scene essentially.
Yeah. Or if I had $20,000 to put into an art thing, I'd be. Well, I know a guy.
I mean, that's kind of the weird thing. You know, going back to it, like obviously we talked about. You know, most hunters, you know, have that artistic view, but maybe aren't like, you know, they're not art collectors and stuff. There's a fascination around the original side, right?
For sure.
You know, in terms of like it's kind of like the buck, right? There's only one. Like, sure, reproductions exist, but there's only one original. Yep. You know, just like, you know, if I wanted to, I probably could call Klaus up and be like, hey, yeah, I want a copy of whatever, handsome buck. I don't know. Maybe he can make that, you know, and you pay for it. But it's a reproduction. It's not the original. Sure. So there's that thought process, and I think a lot of people have that fascination when they get to a certain point in life, or you know, really want to if something captivates them from a scene standpoint, especially. But I think when you get into like, you know, I think like the office space or the hunting camp space, like, you know, having that opportunity and maybe even like it's like, okay, I'm going to build the collection in this space. Yeah. It just, you know, people want to surround themselves. It's like when we walk in this room, we're in deer space. Like immediately. The moment we sit down, we're like, okay, yep, we're in it, right? Yeah. We could go back into my office and it's not nearly as deer space as this. And so people, because it's their passion and because they work hard outside of deer hunting, right? They want to put themselves and surround themselves with that space as much as possible. Yeah. And I think that's really a cool thing.
You know, I told Cody the other day, I had like a vision for a painting the other day. For whatever reason, I just had, because I knew they were coming in, and we just talked to Cody DeQuisto recently. I was like, man, how cool would and I hope you're okay that I share this. Maybe sure. You guys take it and paint it, or if anybody else wants to take a stab and
crossbows and corn pounds.
Well, yeah, that. But I, how cool would it be to have a painting of Cody and Andre DeQuisto? Yeah. In the old shed at going to their Illinois lease under like the shitty light, listening to the radio with a layout map, like that. You know. Yeah.
Well, those are the shirt type things. Like we just did like one like a Kansas scene with we took the pictures of my buck hanging off of a corn bin, basically. You know, we kind of worked with the guys who were coming in here to make that in a shirt. You know, my thing that still hasn't, like anybody hasn't been able to capture is like essentially that feeling, which is the guys in the buck pool type thing. Yeah. Like I just continue to imagine like the feeling of like, you know, a couple deer hanging, campfire going, got like that scene. Anybody that's ever hunted, whether you've done a buck pull or not, can put themselves in it and be like, I can feel the cold air. I can feel the warmth of the fire. I can feel the camaraderie of the success on the pull. Like that is hunt camp. Yeah. If I've ever seen it in a picture.
It's almost like, I'm trying to think of something related. It's almost like a coal miner type. Like you've seen the photographs. It's like, yeah, it's old school and it's gritty, and there's just like they're in a row. Yeah, that's what I imagine with like
just a couple like shadows basically from the fireplace, you know, or from the fire going, and whether the home beers and a couple guys, you know, checking the deer and whatever. Like it's just that is that old school deer camp feeling that comes through, and like so in that mind, like I'm sure somewhere along the line in my life, I've mentally snapped that artwork. Yeah. And so I can see it, but to describe it to someone, it's like, I'm doing the best I can, but like, you know, unless you have the ability to pour that onto a canvas, how else do you do it?
Yeah.
You talk about it a lot on a podcast.
Yeah, and I still don't it still doesn't come to fruition. Yeah.
No, we're getting it.
Yeah.
I mean,
but it'll get there.
Yeah, I've got a vision for it.
Yeah.
Just off what you described, and I am not making a plug for my Instagram, but half of my Instagram now, my dad had this archive of photos that goes all the way back to the beginning that I had never seen most of them until this last Christmas. And he gave my brother and I his whole archive. And I spent like 4 days, like 8 hours a day going through this stuff. And that's a lot of what I've shared. And it is, I bet
it's unbelievable.
And if you just scroll through at some point, you'll see it's just, I have done nothing but just share. I'm not, and the response is like you just said, the amount of people pouring in that are just like this.
That's what got you here. I saw your stuff on Instagram and reached out.
Yeah. And that people just resonate so much with it.
Yeah, because they've experienced, it's ingrained in their brain. And they're trying to, like, you get in a point in life where you're trying to have that nostalgia come out, right? Yeah. I'm there as a 40-year-old guy, like, I still want to kill big deer, right? I still want to have fun experiences, but like I've done that. Now I'm looking back and saying, man, some of those times that I lived, I'm searching for again, right? I'd love to pull those out. And, society and life, everything's changed to where it's, it may never happen, right? You might not ever be able to pull those back out.
Yeah.
But that ingrained picture is in the head still, where it's like, I know it exists, and so when I see scenes like that, it's like, they click and resonate right away. And it's like, man, I remember that feeling.
When they're happening too, it's like almost like when you're sitting there eating the cheese dog and like drinking a Coors Banquet, you're like, this is it. This was like, where's the painter?
Yeah. And I mean, some of that is, unfortunately, like as you're younger, like you overlook a lot of it because you're living in the moment. It is what it is. In retrospect, it was the moment. It was the capture.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the ones. Yeah. We're like, packing out a mule deer from a canyon that we, hiked 5 miles back in and knew that we were going to make it happen, and we did. And then it's like, thinking we're gonna have to drink our piss on the way out because we're so dehydrated.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how you can. It's so.
But you knew it in the moment. You're like, the sun's setting. There's a little Missouri River. You're over the steer. You're sitting there skinning in the field. Like everything is there, and you're like, this is it. Like somebody's taking a picture, right? And like, if I look back,
in an experience like that too, there's a lot of those moments.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You flick through them. Like, yeah, dude. Me shooting that one was memorable for us. Like,
yeah.
I don't even know how you would do it. Like if somebody was behind, like when I look back up on and you're up on the thing.
Yeah, I mean it's filmed. It's filmed in my head, right?
Yeah,
like I can replay it as best as I can.
Yeah.
That it's there and I can relive it. And certain things, mainly in art,
here's another.
We'll set it off.
You looking back at me on that shelf, going like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, how big is he? And Jeremy looking back at me going like this. That's a painting.
Yeah. And then I killed it.
Yeah. 140.
Yeah. The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Quest Hunt Co.
Man, it seems like as technology and social media and stuff just gets incorporated into our daily lives in the deer season more and more, it's like we're always looking for ways to just dial it back, spend more quality time with deer hunters, and really make deer hunting and deer camps great again.
Yeah, and I mean, we've all been part of that annual buck pull, whether it's at your camp or the local fire department, and we're trying to bring that feeling back with Quest Hunt Co. to be able to compete against other people in your state, but also be part of a national competition.
You can sign up in as many states as you want to enter deer that at the end are going to get scored, and you have an opportunity to win some big prizes. And there's an in-person banquet in February that Jeremy and I are going to be at where those prizes are going to get held out. I think we're going to do some sort of whatever, live podcast or speaking. We'll figure that out. But just looking forward to spending time with people who sign up for the tournament.
Yeah, so you can go to Quest Hunt Co. and sign up. Use the code HUNTR15 at checkout. They'll save you a little bit of money, and then hopefully we'll be able to see you in Missouri in February of 25 at the annual convention.
To make this season a quest.
Part of the like nostalgia too. I mean, tell me how you guys feel on this, but one thing that comes with it too is you anticipate that time's going to roll on when you're having an experience like that. But what you don't anticipate is that times like society and life around you is going to actually change so much that a lot of the little things, the little subtleties in those environments, especially go back to like your childhood.
Oh yeah.
You look at the picture and you're like, oh yeah, those boots I used to wear and that old pickup truck my dad used to have. And look at that old gun I used to carry. They don't even make those anymore. It's the whole scene. It's not just like, it's the moments, but it's the combination of that, and unfortunately, there's a lot of stuff that I look back at and I go, I didn't realize when I was in the moment how special it really was. And so that's part of the big nostalgia with some of that old stuff is like it immediately has an impact that you're like, oh, like it resonates on a different level.
Yeah.
That's a great call to action to kind of wrap it up here too, is like to be intentional about realizing when those moments are happening.
For sure.
So, and I feel like I've been pretty intentional about that. It's just, and it's from my dad's cheesiness of like, it's a family moment. It's you know, it's just like, it's important though to stop and to realize like when those moments are happening and just to like take it in.
Yeah. I think I've been better on them as I get older, reflecting on the ones that I've missed and, you know, hoping like, it'll come back around, and a lot of them don't. You know, it just things have evolved too far for them to come back on that. And so, yeah, I mean, you live. It's one of the like we're working on a project now with another company that you know, I was talking to them and I was showing them from like 1987 to 96 or 97. We filmed like all of our deer camps in Pennsylvania, and like none of it's edited. Like it's just, you know, clip after clip, stop, you know. But like every November I'll watch them, you know, just because it was like, it was such a, I knew it was amazing times being there. I look forward to it every year. But now that I don't have it, it's like, it's even more impactful because it's like, geez, I knew these were great. Like it was so special every year. Now knowing like I don't have it anymore, it's like, that was, those were the moments. Yeah. You know, there they are. So at least like, you know, when you talk about like filming and recording and stuff, like some of that's cumbersome and, you know, maybe we don't need to self-glorify everything, but to have those, you know, 30 years later to go back and watch, like it means everything, you know?
Yeah. Too many people don't realize them until like the end of their life or the end of somebody else's life where you're like, oh, we gotta cram in like, hey, grandpa might not have another Christmas or whatever, you know, you try to maximize. It's
and you
like,
missed a lot of the best times.
Yeah. It's like you wait until they were 80 years old to do that. It's like,
Yeah. It's capturing it now. And yeah, I think that's where, even though like a lot of us might not be art type people, like it's in us, you know, you just have to see what it looks like. Like I remember when we took that picture and I don't know, I put some cheesy ass filter over it. I was like, this is going to get blown up someday and be on a wall for us, just because that moment was like, it was the moment, you know, looking back, it was, you know, I could tell you everything about the story. And
nobody took that picture, right? You said it. I think you set the camera on the ground.
It was like a shitty digital camera, like a little like silver like digital timer camera.
Yeah.
And I just set it on a tailgate and took
Coors Banquet there.
Coors Banquet and
old
chili cheese
Gary
dogs
and Alex, old bone collector hats.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah, that's awesome.
The old Predator gear on. You know, it's just that. And I mean, we didn't do it purposely.
I painted that.
Secretly very talented.
Yeah. We didn't do it purposely. Like we took our time. Like we just had it hung up to process it and stuff.
You have that buck? It's right there. Why don't you grab it? Why don't you grab it for him real quick?
That thing had a big old mountain buck head.
That's him right there.
Big old skull on him.
In real life.
I love that deep chocolate.
Yep. Yeah, and like no coloring or anything. That's just who he was, and he went downhill. He's probably 7 or 8 that year, I would say.
Isn't that funny? Even the little things that at the time were like, oh, dude, what the heck? Like, gave it to your buddy for the Beatles, and he just
cut off.
Backed it off. I was like, what are you doing?
Yeah. Well, I remember like looking at that, and I'm like, man, that's cool. And then like we had another one up there that was like a 4-year-old, and we put the skulls together, and you're like, whoa. Like that deer has like a cattle head on him, basically.
And where was that again?
It's on the mountain.
On the mountain. Mm-hmm. Same place this buck was killed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, about 15 minutes away from here.
Remember that Kansas shed I showed you last night? That's the other one we found 100 yards away on public.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, those are the stories, but I do think from like a mass application side, the deer that are known have a ton of value.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Those iconic type deer, and yeah, I mean, there's plenty of deer paintings and stuff out there that are cool, and it's just a big buck. But like, when there's a story behind the deer.
I got the next line for you already.
Oh yeah.
You need to do like the like the blacklisted bucks.
Are you
Like the CJ Alexander buck.
You know what? I
Rompola
thought of
buck.
that. That's, I mean,
The dark side of bucks type of deal, you know?
look, whatever you want to say about Rompola, that would be a really cool painting.
Oh my, yeah, absolutely.
You know,
and there,
It'd have to be landscape.
even with all we said here, there'll be plenty of people that'll be like, yeah, I know it's real anyways.
Yeah.
Oh, of course.
Fine, buy it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It didn't burn down. He still has it.
Well, I just think too, I've even on a different perspective on this, like you talk about being surrounded by this stuff, you know, in my future, I'm going to do a new man cave and I've got all this stuff. For those that can't go collect even replicas of all these famous deer, think about this. Like you've got your trophy room or whatever, you've got one of each of like the most famous deer ever that are included in the entire scene.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's a cool reason to collect. And like I said, these go all the way down to like a 10 by 10 that you can get for $120 all the way up to the big sizes. So it could be a scene in your office where you have, this is my famous whitetail wall here.
Putting it at the deer camp, whatever you want. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think it's really cool, man. And those are, no matter what people say of like, oh, I hunt for meat or whatever, like those are the buck
paint meat.
Those are the bucks that your dreams are made of.
Yeah.
You go to sleep in October dreaming of that thing looking at you.
Yeah. I hope to have a scene like that one time in my life. It doesn't have to be the world record, but just a buck of that, you know, caliber.
Who doesn't, man? That's the dream.
Man.
I've had one experience, and I hope I get another chance at that.
Good time.
Yeah, one, but it'll haunt me for a long time.
Yeah.
So
we'll do that.
They will do that. Well, cool, dude. Well, man, like I said, we really appreciate you actually coming into office and having the studio podcast with us. I mean, that makes these kind of conversations way more impactful.
I think you have the record. I think you've traveled the furthest.
I think so.
Really?
I think so.
Yeah. I would say you have the record.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm excited. As soon as you said it, we were on the phone. I was actually in Texas on a work trip, and I said, I'll make it happen. And I just love it. I think this is fun, and it's just, I've done a couple podcasts on virtual, and like you said, it's just less intimate. It's less, plus it's nice to actually get to meet you guys.
Oh, dude, it's
and
awesome.
Hang out a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, to do like an in-person reveal with this thing is amazing. Obviously, I hope a lot of people listen to this. Number one, check out the davidfrederickriley.com for everything that's going to come. What's your release schedule? You're thinking?
So this one here is available.
Hanson's number 2. It's in progress, right?
This one will be available by the time this
one will drop for a few weeks.
Yeah,
so.
Cool. And people can use the Hunter.
Yep.
I hope people listening to this, just like I did, kind of knowing when you were coming on, start to like Google around Dick Idol and just like see. I'm like, oh, like all of the things like he is involved in, has been involved in. Pretty amazing on that side to see how many different things. I didn't know until Jared said that he was, one of the founders of North American Whitetail Magazine.
Yeah,
we were talking last night, just BSing, and he's like, Donnie Vincent came up, and he's like, yeah, dude, Donnie wrote you, a couple years ago or whatever.
Yeah,
like
about 6 months ago.
6 months out of the blue, and was like, hey, dude, just want to let you know, like your dad was one of the big inspirations for me getting into like some of his filming aspects and stuff like that, right?
Especially with whitetail, yeah. I know he hunts a lot of different stuff.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, and so you look at somebody who like now would be like, I would say, leading a lot of the from a creative standpoint, like and how he's doing his production and stuff. It's like it's quite a compliment.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say that's so funny about that is my dad's heyday kind of ended. I was born 87. So like I just missed the actual travel days and the magazine starting and all that. Plus he was really known in North Carolina. So come back out to Montana, and my brother and I grew up really not knowing a whole lot about it. I hunted hard with him, and he was my hero.
But it was like isolated from everything else.
And so the first time we were in like a little cafe out there in Big Fork, Montana, and these group of guys came up and said, hey, can we get your autograph? And my brother and I were looking at him like,
what are they talking about?
But it didn't make any sense. So it's actually been a fun thing in my adult life to go take a deep dive off into. And I don't know like half of it. These archives were exciting and frustrating at the same time. I was like, Dad, how do we not?
Yeah.
Because they weren't the type to do something and prop it up. Yep. So all he said my whole childhood was like, hey, I've saved some stuff you guys will enjoy one day. And when I got into this, I was like, there's like 25 totes full of pictures that go back like 60 years to all this stuff. And I'm like, and then when I started looking, there's mom holding a buck. Oh, that's the knife handle buck. And she's got the Fleming sheds and the Illinois roadkill. And he's like, here's when I first went and got the Illinois roadkill. And here's the story of the hole in the horn buck. And it goes and goes. And there's documented pictures of all this stuff. So I was like, the last time I saw him, I was like, I love you, but in a loving way, I'm mad at you right now because I should have known all of this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what he's done and what you guys have done or planned, but I mean, it needs to, the public needs to know more about it, and so, whether that's like a mini documentary on the Idol family and your dad or I mean, because much like we just talked about, hey, wait too long, like these stories that I'm sure he has, you got to pry out of them.
Yeah.
And just because, someday, your kids and your grandkids are going to want to know who that guy was. And,
totally.
And I think that, for a lot of us, things that will come up in those discussions will spark that nostalgia in ourselves, and that is a really cool thing. I think, to be honest, if there's a movement that, I think is happening and will only get stronger here, is that kind of nostalgia type movement. And probably because, if you look at like the core group of hunters, most of us are over, 30 for sure. And so I think that nostalgia movement is going to continue as tradition has changed, as things in the hunting landscape has really changed. And yeah, I don't know, maybe someday, deer camps become the normal thing again or whatever. But, yeah, I think it would do really well. I think that the general public would really enjoy that kind of stuff.
Amen. And that's what's so cool is that's my motivation. Is I was telling Jared yesterday, I mean, I'm in the art world. There's not an actual publicity incentive at all on my dad or myself. This is actually still because we love it. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like we are at a turning point. Like if someone gets involved now, falls in love with hunting and they're in their early 20s, if nobody shares it with them, there's going to be a whole generation of young men and women that are doing this that they just don't know.
They have no idea.
And they're going to base it off when they come into the game of what they see just on social media and stuff. And it would just be kind of a bummer. It's worth sharing that and passing that heritage down.
I think the history is so important. I mean, that to me, even just in American culture, like where my kids are school age, right? 8 and 12. And like, I was talking to my 12-year-old. I'm like, so like in history, you guys talk about like the Civil War and stuff? And he's like, what? And I'm like, what do you mean? Like that's a very important part of American history, right? It's Civil War. And it wasn't that long ago. And like, they don't talk about it anymore.
Right.
And like, that was a weird way. Like that was one of my passions going into college. Like I did a lot of minoring in like Civil War history and stuff. And it was just super fascinating to understand it because times were so different. So like the history, I think, of hunting is so important because as we talk about the 40s, 50s, 60s, and then you roll into like the heydays of the 80s and 90s, like everything is so different than what we have today. It's important to understand that and recognize it because there's things that I think we're going to learn that maybe we're making as mistakes now. There's things that we did back then that we're doing now way better. Mm-hmm. But if you don't know the history, you have no baseline to understand if you're doing it right or wrong. Like nothing.
100%.
So yeah, I mean, I think that history aspect of it is so critical. Because yeah, I mean, there is a huge fear of that new generation growing up with like just what they're seeing on YouTube and social media, and like if that's what they're basing everything on, yeah, I don't know what 30 years from now will look like.
Well, and another topic for another day would just be also the protection of these rights and privileges on a conservation end.
Sure,
we need a healthy, strong, outdoor community that cares about that and the history because there are places where rights and abilities are going away. And if you have people that aren't even educated on the way it was.
Yeah, we've absolutely gotten way weaker on that. Even the group of us who are, immensely tied to the outdoors and to conservation and everything, we're divided, right? We're because of viewpoints and everything. So yeah, we've at one point in time, even though maybe we weren't as advanced, we were very much united in the front. Like we all loved hunting for X reason.
Yep.
Now it's for a multitude of reasons, which has divided us even further. And that's a weakness.
Yep.
So again, learn from the history of it, and figure out how to continue to improve. But no, I think that's a huge point of how we move forward. And the unfortunate thing is, or fortunate, however you want to look at it, is like we're more visible than ever, right? Like back in the 90s, even though we were united, like, most local areas just supported hunting because it was very much just known locally. Like people in New York didn't even really know hunting existed, like New York City, not like New York State. New York City, because you didn't see it anywhere. Like they weren't getting North American Whitetail Magazine and stuff. Like they were just displaced from it. Now they could trip across some algorithm on Facebook and their feed's full of people killing deer.
Yep.
So we're visible to them now, and they're like, I don't like this. That is a major change in how society is seeing hunting at a point where we're probably pretty weak and divided at the same time. So yeah, I mean, we're seeing the rights in Colorado and stuff get it put on ballots, and I mean, you take some of this to the general public for voting, and it will not end well for us.
Right.
It won't, because that's just the thought process to the point of like trophy hunting, and in that it might not be. We may say trophy hunting as not a bad thing to get that deer or animal to full maturity, to harvest it at its peak. People see trophy hunting as purely for the rack, right?
Sure.
Waste everything else,
Right.
Essentially just take the trophy and run.
Right. And what we mean is good conservation.
Exactly. But that term has been so slandered, from many years of things going wrong in the anti-hunting space, that now the general public, just like the predator side, are like, well,
yeah, they just assume you're like kicking puppies.
Yeah, they're
Right.
like, well, we
Might as well be.
Yeah, Michigan just knocked out a big chunk of the coyote season because they're like, well, we don't want to kill like coyotes when they're having pups. That's mean. And it's like, what? What are you talking about? Like, it's management. We're just managing. Like,
yeah,
the science is behind it, but they don't. It's emotional pulls, right? It's public perception.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, dude, nature's harsh too, and the reality is like,
We're soft.
animals die and people die too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So and so you want
Yeah.
to do it in a way that is most advantageous to the species and to us, and that
Yeah.
is conservation.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's probably the least understood thing from a general public standpoint.
Yeah.
Like they just think that the waterways will always be clean. They think that the forest will always regenerate and be healthy. Like that's just, what do you mean? Like it's just nature. It just does it. You leave it alone and it's fine.
Yeah.
They don't understand that at all. So yeah, it's a scary thing, but I think the history aspect of hunting and conservation, and I mean, man, really from looking back to those 40s and 50s, where like I know my grandpa would say, like, we saw a deer track in the snow and like 15 kids came from around the neighborhood to see it, and it's like,
That's incredible.
I see 15 deer driving to work 5 minutes away, So it's just I don't. Like the appreciation for that is there, understanding where we've come from in the last 80 years. But I think without that understanding, like people just take it for granted. They're like, yeah, there's deer everywhere. Like, what do you mean you're worried about there not being any more deer?
Right.
So, no, man, it's really cool. We appreciate you coming in, and people will be able to see this on display probably right here
I think that's
for the next 200 podcast.
Well, and if you're loving it, as we bring them out, we'll have to send you some more.
Oh yeah, dude, absolutely.
We would be honored.
I can size them down too if we got to fit some smaller spaces.
We'll fit them in. We got spaces. Yeah, we got spaces.
We got houses too, believe it or not. So.
Yeah.
We've
There's a
got
lot of
houses,
walls
we've got
with
deer
potential.
camps,
Yeah.
we got plenty of
I know where some
potential.
walls are at.
Yeah. In 2026, we'll just have David paint Jared and I, and then we can just sell that as the hunter.
There you go. Yeah, you might have to get a painting of this one
Yeah,
done.
there you go. That would be cool.
We'll make some new memories.
Yeah. No, dude, we appreciate you coming in, and we appreciate everyone listening to Cody Idol in studio with us, and make sure that we check out the davidfrederickriley.com for the art. And then do you guys have Dick Idol Galleries on? You've got a website on that side too.
Yep.
So,
DickIdolGallery.com and And then obviously he's got his own website too,
Yep.
the dickidol.com. So
Yeah. So
Bummer that I assume dickpics.com is already taken.
we tried for that one, but
it's probably a hefty cost.
couldn't get it, huh? They wouldn't sell it to you.
He's like, actually, Cody, one of the things I didn't tell you is I
actually own dickpics.com.
Yeah, I've been sitting on this for a while. I guess it's worth something at this point. So yeah, no, but we appreciate it, man, and thanks for sharing stories about your dad and kind of the history there. Really cool to hear that, and we appreciate everybody listening to number 200 of the HUNTR Podcast with Cody Idol, and we'll catch y'all next week.
Later.
thanks, guys.
Take me